Oh, there we go. Hey, welcome to the fine print, Tim. Yo, it's a pleasure to have you here. Can you hear me, man?
Yeah, gotcha.
Beautiful. Yo, so everybody, this is Tim McBride, the Saltwater Cowboy. Uh, as I said, let me slap this. I think I might have fucked up the intro again. Bang, Saltwater Cowboy, Tim McBride joining us today, and it's really a pleasure to have you on, Tim. I've been waiting for this for a few months here.
Thanks, man. No, it's a blast to finally be here too, Brad. I've been watching you a little bit.
Oh, thank you. Yo, and you know what's fucked up here, Tim, is that I normally ask my guests to start with a 5-minute life story, but this entire interview is going to be your life story.
Right.
So yeah. Tell people, like, look, this might take a minute, and as I said, this might be a two-parter, but I'd like you to. Yeah, I'd love if you started right at the beginning of your life and just tell us, where you're from, what your family was, and all of that type of shit.
Yeah, well, I mean, nothing extraordinary about my upbringing or dysfunctional in any way, that ultimately caused me to wound up being who and what I became, which we'll get to. But no, I was actually born and raised in North Carolina. My father was 82nd Airborne, when he got out of the Army finally. And, Fort Bragg, family kind of migrated to the Midwest a little bit. And my still being a youngster at that time and just coming up into high school age, I did my 4 years of high school in a little town in southern Wisconsin, just west of a tourist town called Lake Geneva. I was in high school in a little town called Delavan for 4 years, freezing my fucking ass off, man. But one thing led to another. I wound up, doing my 4 years there, and having making a lot of good friends, of course, like you do in high school and stuff. But that shit wasn't for me. I was always the kind of guy where if something better came along, man, I just went for it. So I wound up having the opportunity at one point in that time before coming to Florida. I worked for 2 years out in LA for an entertainer of those earlier days called, his name was Sammy Davis Jr. I worked for several years doing his personal video recording, and what that involved was taking a television guide to either him or one of the other people in Hollywood that were famous at that time that I was working with, and give them a television guide. One of the old TV guys that you guys like you have never seen, but he would literally mark in the book the shows that he wanted to watch, and then it would have been my job to go and watch those videos or watch those movies, and then you record them, but edit the commercials out of them as I'm recording them, because he was doing a lot of Broadway theater and stuff, and when he watched TV, he didn't fuck around with commercials in it. So I was one of the first TiVos.
So you saved time for him.
Yeah, I was saving him time. Plus, his financial advisor, Richard, who I was living with, and my cousin Joey. My cousin Joey actually got me the job because he was running the tour bus for Sammy. Him and his buddy Hogan, they would drive that tour bus whenever he needed to, never needed to go somewhere. And Richard couldn't go anywhere by flying. He had to go by by bus because he's had this inner ear thing. So
you worked for Sammy Davis Jr. Let's not gloss over that. That seems like kind of awesome.
Yeah, it was all right. I mean, at first it was kind of, I was a little bit struck by, the entertainers that I was being introduced to, because what Richard had at that time, Sammy's some financial advisor had put together one of the first video duplication companies in Hollywood with regards to VHS tape. And that was about the time I was out in LA at that time, between, I think, 1977 and 78-ish.
How old were you then, Tim?
Just 18 and 19 years old.
Okay, cool.
At that time.
So you're out in Hollywood when you're 18, 19.
Just about I would rather say 19, 20, because I had just turned 21 prior, after I had left there. I just turned 21, and, going to the bars and clubs and stuff was nothing new to us, as kids, even, because in where we lived in Wisconsin, actually in Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin, the drinking age is 18. In Illinois, which is, Chicago and the metropolitan area, which wasn't that too far away from there, was only, we were right on the border. So everybody that I knew basically and partied with, on the weekends and shit was from Illinois, because it was 21 age there in 18. So they all drove up to where, their family had summer cabins and shit on the lake. Because Delavan was a lake, actually, Delavan Lake and Lake Geneva, they're tourist towns from people in Chicago. And, so, that's just how I, from where I came and, and just happened to, meet, I was hanging out with my cousin and, over holidays, at, Christmas time or whatever. And he said, come on out to LA and stay and hang out for a while. And that's how I wound up going out and meeting, Sammy's financial advisor and the people that were working with him. And he said, dude, you want a job? I said, yeah, fuck yeah, why not? So I took that job. And it was after a couple of years of doing it. I worked for Sonny and Cher. Milton Berle is an old comedy name from back in the day. Roosevelt Greer, who used to be a professional NFL player, and just a who's who of people in LA, that were friends of Richard's, who by chance he had first run motion picture from the cellulose from major motion picture houses from like Columbia United Artists and, places like that, where they didn't have a lot of independent filmmakers in those days. These were the big boys they were taking. And he was getting these first run motion pictures, 2 and 3 months before they even appeared in theaters. So after they appeared in theaters, they would have, he's running copies of these things. And he's got a 5-story building and 1 floor dedicated to banks of these computerized VHS printers that are throwing out a tape about every 10 seconds. They're high speed recording these fucking things. But he was on the forefront of that, and I was my job to all these celebrities around Brentwood, Westwood, LA, Hollywood, Beverly Hills, all had Richard's name and number. And he would, update a list of all these new movies that he got from all these motion picture houses and offer them a chance to get a copy of the video. I mean, a month before it even came out in the theater. So he's running this kind of black market thing back in, with all these celebrities back in LA at that time. And my job, of course, was to make a tape for whoever was on the fucking list and then wind up delivering it to them, to their house, to wherever they lived, which was, it was cool at first, and I met a lot of people, and it allowed me, the recording aspect of it allowed me, sometimes I just throw some fucking tape on, because the apartment that Sammy rented me in Encino, which was in the valley off of Ventura Boulevard in Balboa, was only about, maybe a half a mile up from a little cut through the mountains called Topanga Canyon, which is where you could get to the beach. And then just north of that was Laurel Canyon, where all the old hippies from the 60s used to write a lot of cool music back in the day. A lot of those vocal groups came out of Laurel Canyon. And I was only just a couple of miles from those cuts to get out to the beach. So I'd put on a bunch of tapes and shit, because I had all different formats of taping throughout the house that they provided for me, depending on whoever wanted to watch what type of tape. And there weren't that many at that time. Hey, those big giant Betamax things, they call them. They were like 3/4-inch tapes, but this thick.
Yo, I'm old enough. I know what Betamax is, Tim.
So yeah, I mean, that's what it was in the day. But then VHS comes out. VHS comes out, man. And I don't mean to say you're like an egg or some fucking shit.
I'm almost 40. I'm pushing 40 here.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
Bless you. You look like you just graduated high school.
Thank you. I still have a baby face. That works well for me.
I get a lot of that. I get a lot of, you're 65. Yeah, fuck yeah, I'm 65, man.
Are you 65 now?
Yeah, I'm 65.
You're looking great, Tim.
And it's it's not for the lack of trying, dude. I put the the time in, in order to to keep up. I mean, I'm not one of those guys that just gonna sit around and get fucking old or some shit, But anyways, back to the LA thing.
Carry on. I'm just gonna let you do this. I'm gonna interject with some random questions, but yeah, I'm gonna let you carry it on.
No, that's cool. That's cool. No, I would put on some tapes and shit and whatever, and just let them record. And I'd grab one of my buddies and we'd head out through Topanga Canyon out to the beach and, throw the fucking Frisbee for the afternoon or some shit while all this taping is going on and stuff. So even if it was a show on television, I could tape it. Then I could come back, because I had 2 machines. I could go from one machine to another and then edit the commercials out of it that way. So I always had a backup plan. So I didn't always have to stick around the apartment and shit, even though it was a cool apartment. I mean, fuck, Sammy paid for everything, dude. I had a credit card, I had a gas card, I had a rent-a-car, I had the apartment paid for, the food and the groceries were all paid for. I didn't have to spend plus I was getting a paycheck from him every week. It had Sammy Davis Jr. written. I mean, it was a personal check kind of right on the fucking check. And I had First time I ever went downtown to Bank America down in town, LA, to cash that fucker. I had security on me, man. They want to know, where the hell did you get this check? And I was, jacking Sammy's checks or some shit, because I'm just, I walk in there and cut off some fucking tennis shoes and got a t-shirt on, and they want to know who's this fucking guy in there trying to cash his check from Sammy Davis Jr. So it only happened the one time, so I wound up, working like that, but I didn't have to spend the money on anything. I was just packing it in there, man. But, it was cool, but once I had done that, I'd been there for a little while, and, the television scene and the movies and that kind of shit. And I saw how it was done. I saw all these movie sets everywhere. You drive around LA and up through the hills, and like that. They're always shooting a fucking movie somewhere. And I always have the habit of pulling over just to see what the fuck, because, they're either going to.
That is where movies are made out there.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people, watch these movies and they're predicted, like they're in Korea, or even the Apocalypse Now was filmed in fucking South Carolina, for Christ's sake, because the jungle looks like jungle. Doesn't matter where in the hell you're at, But that's the miracle of Hollywood.
That's my favorite movie of all time, by the way. I just want to point that out there.
Oh yeah. I love this. I love the smell
in the Carolinas.
Yeah, most of it was filmed in Carolinas. Because the coastline and those backwoods, and even the Southwest, here in South Florida, at the shoreline could, you wouldn't know where the fuck you were at unless they told you. Because a mangrove shoreline looks like a mangrove shoreline no matter where the fuck you're at. But not only that, they get a tax credit for making the movies in North and South Carolina. So a lot of people will make movies there, and a lot of movies are made in Canada, in Vancouver and in Canada, because they get a over almost a 60% tax break on making a motion picture in there. So that's why it's done that way. But regardless of that fact, I saw how it was done. I saw the magic of television and all that kind of shit, and that just burst the bubble for me for movies and television dudes. And now that I saw that they're just average fuckers just like the rest of us, who put their pants on the same way we do. And that's their job they get up and go to every day. Once you get that shit figured out, you find out that the movie isn't really the magical thing that you ever thought it was, or they don't go really a lot of times go to these exotic locations. It's like, fuck this shit, man. I'd had enough of it. And I wound up packing my shit in my Mustang one day, and I drove my ass back to fucking Wisconsin. And I wasn't there for not even 3 days. I don't think I was there that long. And a guy that I had grown up with, I lived next door to growing up with, there on the lake, we'd get up early in the morning before, go to high school and go water skiing. And I was a slalom skier, and I did amateur and pro tour slalom skiing when I was a kid, in high school and shit. Yeah. And it's just such a blast. And we'd wake up in the morning and the lake is just glass. And that's when you can really, pull a nice cut, and we would just slice that water up for about an hour and a half or so, and then dry off and drive in and go to school, go to high school. Yeah. The school that I went to was pretty cool in a way that it was done on a modular system. There was 23 out of 24 modulars during the day, 20-minute segments, 20-minute periods. So your classes were either 20 minutes, 40 minutes, or an hour long. And the days went 1 through 6. So each Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Friday, Monday would start day 6. So Monday is not day 1 again. So Monday is day 6, Tuesday is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You get to the next Monday, and that's day 2. So you're never doing the same shit. And I see him froze up. You still got me?
Yeah. No, you're good. The audio's perfect. The video chopped up for a second, but everything looks really nice.
Okay, because I'm just kind of froze
I'm still working on my StreamYard. You're my third interview, Tim. So I'm still figuring out the technology, and I'm not a tech guy. But look,
gotcha.
Questions or comments for Tim, drop them in. I'll read them. Bang, right. Dude.
Yeah. Well, as long as you can see me, if I'm moving around, because
I can see you and you sound good, dude. If there's ever a problem, I will let you know.
All right, cool. It's just I'm waiting for this thing to kick back in.
I wish I could have got a better banner in there for you. It just says Tim. Over here it says Caleb Teskey in the fine print. Yo,
I'm not worried, dude. Don't remember when we get done. They'll remember who the fuck.
I'm still figuring it all out, Tim. But I'm really happy that you're here, dude. And can I tell you before we get too far into this? I want to tell you that my dad was arrested in the biggest cannabis seizure in Vermont history in 1991 with
Really?
Billy Greer. They were smuggling 50 tons of hash from Canada into Vermont. And that's some of the reason that I was super attracted to your story, because that was one of the stories that really defined my childhood.
Right.
It fucked me up a lot. And you know, like my dad really kind of, it broke up our family, you know,
Really?
and
Wow.
so yeah, and I had to go visit him in multiple prisons, and it wasn't fun for me. But
Right.
when I heard your story, I was like, yo, this is the same story, but in Florida
Right. Yeah. You know, and
on a more massive scale.
yeah, well, slightly more massive. Yeah. You know, and I did one
Oh,
thing I do know is that Canadians love their hash, man. I always knew that. You know, even from back in the '80s, they you know they love their hash there in Canada, man.
oh. So
Um,
tell us how you ended up in Florida, because it sounded like you moved there, right?
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Now I had, like I said, the guy I used to go water skiing with every morning before school was, you know, he had graduated, you know, years ahead of me. He was a little bit older. I always been hung around with older people for some whatever reason. I guess just my mentality and my, you know, my way of, you know, handling myself was always, you know, it wasn't kid stuff. You know, it was always I was always that guy, and you read it and you'll read it in the book. I even put it this way that, you know, if there's some, you know, I'm not that guy standing in the back of the crowd on his tiptoes trying to see what the fuck's going on up front. I'm that guy that's elbowing his way to the front through all these assholes to see if there's some shit going on. Because if there's some shit going on up there, I went in on it. You know,
and there's
that's
the
me.
book
That's,
again.
you know,
Just I'm gonna shamelessly plug this a couple times in here, but there's the book again, Saltwater Cowboy.
absolutely. Isn't he a
Yeah,
good-looking motherfucker? That guy in the book, you know?
wow. Yeah. Yeah. Hey.
Yeah,
Wow.
but that
Oh.
was uh, that was taken in 2015 when I published the book by a dear friend
So
of mine
Tim,
who we were just fucking.
yeah, tell us how you ended up in Florida, and tell us how you ended up getting your way into this sort of smuggling operation.
Okay, yeah. Now this guy that I'm telling you about, my water skiing buddy, his sister lived on this little island here in Southwest Florida, just about 30 minutes south of where I am right now in Naples. It's right on the northwestern edge of the Everglades, and the Everglades National Park Ranger Station is right there in town. It's two little islands connected by causeway. One is called Everglades City, and the other one is Chokoloskee Island. And Chokoloskee Island is where my buddy's sister lived with her husband, who was a native there. And they both together ran the only fish house on that island. There were a bunch of fish houses in Everglades City where the rest of the fleet would bring their catch to. But the guys in the boats that were out on the Chokoloskee Island, they're on about five.
Processing fish.
Yeah, well, yeah, processing the stone crabs, you know,
Okay.
and
Cool.
the
Sorry to interrupt
stone.
you.
No, that's fine, man. And you know, and I can, you know, start pulling up some shit here while we're talking. But we would go out every day. Well, actually, his brother and sister own, you know, running this fish house on the island. They offered him a job to come down and work on one of these stone crab fishing boats, and he took the job. And he called me up and said, "Dude, you know, I'm moving to Florida tomorrow, man. You want to go?" I said, "Fuck yeah!" Threw all my shit back in my Cobra and my Mustang and took off for Florida the next morning without even giving it a second thought. Man, I just, yeah, fuck yeah! So we drove our ass off for 2 days and wound up down here in you know, in Southwest Florida, and then Highway 29 that we took, you know, up in upper Central Florida, all the way down the middle of the state, turns to the east, to the west, and it dead ends right on that little island, man. It's only 129 acres.
About 21 at this point when you
Yeah.
first moved on it. Yeah.
Yeah, just turned 21,
Yeah.
and I don't know if I can get it right
There
there.
we go. Hey,
That's the
whoa.
island right there.
So you
It's only
drive out over this little bridge that they've built.
You drive out that little causeway. You can see the causeway starting back there.
And you live
drive
there.
out that causeway and live on that island right there. Yeah. Where
That's
that
where
causeway,
you moved to.
that's the island I moved to. Then there's 10,000 islands, and that little causeway that runs, you can see it right there along my finger. It runs back here. That's where the other island is, sitting right there. That's Everglades City.
Is that Chokoloskee?
That's Chokoloskee Island right there. And it even shows you
Okay.
got a little thing. This is from a postcard I sent to my mom back in the day. And I said, there's my trailer right there.
Is that motherfucking trailer? My MF trailer or something? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
But
so that's where you moved to.
that's where I moved to. And I had a job helping his brother and his sister finish building their brand new house. So I had something to do while I was there while he went and, took this job on this
Were
crowd.
you a construction guy, Tim?
Never was. I haven't done any shit like that in my life. I was just, I said, you know what? I'll carry their shit for them. I'll be their tender. I'll be the mason's tender. I'll be the carpenter and just whatever. They didn't give a fuck even just so I was there working and had something to do. Just, so as the story goes, now Mark is working on this stone crab vessel. And what we do on these boats, there's our boat right there.
That's a shrimping boat.
That's what stone crab.
Me right now, Tim.
What's that?
What kind of boat was it? What are you fishing for?
This is a stone crab vessel.
Oh, okay, cool.
This is for stone crabs and stone crab traps, and I'll show you what those traps look like here in a second, and I'll show you what we catch. Now,
this is what you started with when you moved to Florida.
This is what Mark started on. I was still building the house. This is about Mark started working on. So it takes two people to work in the back of the boat. Let me see. In the back of the boat, which is, of course, let me see.
Don't pull up a dick picture on there, Tim.
You see where the two are standing. I'm on the right, and that's my buddy Mark on the left. He's working on the rail, and we're just standing there, getting the boat prepped because we got a day off or whatever and shit like that. But that's the boat we use to go offshore. When we talk about loading the boats, you look on top of the wheelhouse, and you see the antenna arrays and the radar array. Yes. We would even stack pot bales on top of the roof. Just so that antenna, so that radar would turn.
Ahead of yourself, Tim. We're still talking about the fishing here. Don't.
Yeah. But when we get to that point, at least you'll have a bit of an idea about what the boat looks like.
So that's the first boat you worked on, right there.
That was the first and only boat that I ever worked on, because these are what the stone crab traps look like, right there.
And now, can you tell everyone, because I kind of cock teased them with the picture, can you tell everyone why they call you the Saltwater Cowboy, and tell them a little bit about the book, and I think there was a movie maybe also?
Well, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things in the works.
Before we get into all the details, maybe you could just give us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I'm giving you a little bit of background about what the stone crabbing entails and the type of work. Now, those traps that I just showed you, they weigh an average of 50 to 60 pounds, and they don't look it. But the bottom 6 inches of those wooden lath traps are concrete. So when you push them off the back of the boat, they land bottom down, so the crabs can crawl into the top of them. And we have that boat, just the one boat that was the captain and 2 crewmen. That was the only people that worked that vessel. We had 6,000 of those traps, and we would pull 600 a day. Most of the other boats,
3 people.
The captain's running the boat, and there's only 2 of us on the stern. I'm on the starboard stern, and Mark is on the port stern. When he pulls his trap, I'm pushing one over. Wow. He's cleaning and collecting and grabbing the crabs out of his trap. The boat's pulling up to the next buoy. I grab that buoy, and as I grab that buoy, he pushes his already new baited trap over. So every time we pull one, we leave one back and forth. 300 traps in one line going one direction, 15, 20 miles long, skip over, have lunch, pull 300 traps back the other direction so you're not twice as far away from where you started. That's how it works. Well, there were 2 guys working. There was Mark and another guy from Michigan, and I was building this fucking house. And Billy, the captain, didn't know this Michigan guy that well, so they kind of wanted to get rid of his ass because there was shit going on, and Billy wanted to get back in the mix of it, the captain of that boat that I just showed you. So they worked this guy about a week, and that's all it took him to work this fucker to death, and he quit because this kind of work will make a man out of you quick, buddy. It's not, it's not for the faint of heart. It's
I
ball
have a friend
busting.
here in Vermont who worked on a crab boat in Alaska, and he's told me about some of this. And it,
Dude, and you know what?
I'm not cut out for that. I just want to say that right now.
No. If they're pulling, the king crab traps, and the way that it's done is not all that dissimilar from the way that we do it. They've got that big wheel that's spinning. When they reach out there with their grapple hook, between two bags with a line, they grab that and pull that, and they put that around that big wheel. That's called a shiv. And it's like two pie pans together like this. And when that rope gets in between it, it cinches that rope and it starts to pull it. So as it's turning, it's pulling that rope in. But at the bottom, there's a little thing called a knife and it's really not a knife, but it kicks that rope back out so it doesn't continue to go around the wheel. Now they're using rope, 3/4 inch fucking rope, because their traps weigh 1,000 pounds. Ours only weigh as much as 60 pounds. We've got 3/8 inch nylon rope and a buoy, styrofoam buoy about this big. We're hooking them with a catch hook, and they're using that damn thing. So it's all very similar. But of course, there's no fucking way it even compares to what those guys are doing. They're out of their fucking mind, But when you're pulling 300, you're pulling 600 a day.
I'm gonna tell, hey, Nate LaRoe, yo, call in.
Yeah, that's some wicked ass shit there. But anyways, they get rid of this fucking guy, and they say, "Oh, Timmy, come on now, we got to, be our third guy on the boat." So they imparted to me about how it worked. You wake up about 3, 4 in the morning, because it takes a while for that boat to get to where it needs to go, because it's not a fast moving vessel. It's built for power rather than speed, because you've got to put 600 fucking traps on there. You're talking 40,000 plus pounds of weighted traps that you're taking at any one time out, on the water. Or if you have to move them because they're not catching, you pick them fuckers up.
So these are fucking big boats here.
Well, that boat that I showed you, that's your typical stone crab vessel. And it's got that big, wide open deck.
How many traps could you fit on that boat that you just showed me there?
600.
600? Oh, okay.
Yeah. And they're, you're talking about 600 of them, and they're at 60 pounds a piece. Do the math. That's a lot of weight. So these boats are, by their very nature and designed to haul these stone crab traps, because of the way they're almost all decked. You saw that boat. They're perfectly designed for loading bales of fucking pie on them, man. But to get you back up to speed here, they explained to me that you wake up early, about sun up, but just as the sun's coming up, and you pull that first trap, because there's a lot of work to do, man. You got 600 of these fuckers to get through. But at that time, when I first got on, we were only pulling 450. We got so good at it, we built ourselves up to the 600. So regardless, so I get on the boat that night. You got your sack lunch, and I got my cutoffs and my crab boots. I'm ready to go to work, and I climb in the bunk, which is in the wheelhouse. And the captain, he's driving out to the shit, and we're on our bunk sleeping, because it's like 3:30 in the morning, man. So they wake us up when we get to the line, just light enough, like I said, to see the first buoy. That's when we start.
So that's 3:30. That's like the first light.
Yeah, well, 3:30 is when we get on, and we got 2 hours to get to. It's usually typically 2 hours or so to get to where we need to be, where our first trap line is, because we've got 600 traps spread out in 10 different locations all over the Gulf and at varying depths. So we do 600 a day. We go here, we go there, we go there, we go there, and then we make our way all the way back around again, and we start again on that same.
And you're the guy pulling the traps up?
I'm the guy on the stern with with Mark, and I'm pulling 300, and he pulls 300, because we're both doing our half, and
you're the muscle. You guys are the muscle.
Yeah, we're the workhorse of the fucking thing, man. Because
pulling up off the boat. Okay.
When you grab that fucking buoy, depending on what way the tide's pulling the rope, and if the boat's going like this, coming against a boat that's on the tide like this, it's got all that slack. It's got all that slack left in the line to pick that buoy up. But if your lines are pulled that direction and you're coming from the opposite direction, the minute you snag that fucker, boom, there's the trap right there. The boat has to back down and give you enough rope to get it through the block and tackle and around thing that's spinning shit.
Depending on which direction you're going, that could easily maybe cause some injuries or maybe something.
Well, it's just tough. You grab that fucking thing, and if you're not holding on or you don't let go of that catch,
if you go the wrong way, that could fuck your arm up.
Well, it'll pull you overboard.
Or that.
I've seen a lot of guys go overboard hanging on to that fucking. Said, let go of the fucking thing.
You've seen people go overboard on these boats.
Oh fuck yeah. Fuck yeah. I mean, dumbasses. I mean, rookies that are holding on to, they reach out and grab that buoy, and there's before the captain can back down, and give you some slack, they're trying to hang on to it, and then it'll pull you right off the bat. Because
have you seen anyone die on any of these boats?
No, it's not that.
Okay.
It's not deadly as cat.
No, but you get them back. That's good. That's what I was hoping.
Just circle back around, pick the fucker up, get on board, and okay. And now when it gets tight like that, let go of the fucking catch pole, for Christ's sake, But I mean, that's just a guy trying to do his best, like that. But what we figured out to do was, rather than fuck with those tight lines, which obviously takes a lot of time for the boat to stop, back down enough for you to get enough line to work with to get it through that shift and start pulling that trap. We would just say, fuck that, run to the other end of the line and pull slack lines back the other direction, So that's what we did. We went to the other direction. And when you grab that buoy, now there's all that slack, and the boat doesn't even need to stop. It's just weaving and cruising between these buoys back and forth. I'm picking up one. Mark picks up one. I dump mine. He dumps his. I pick one up, and you don't have to stop. But during that time, you've got that trap in your possession. You've got to take the fucking crabs out of it. You've got to make sure all the boards are good and tight, otherwise you have to replace them. You have to make sure there's no knots in the ropes and anything like that, because we're out there catching these big bastards right here. That's what a stone crab looks like. And that's the lucrative catch that we're catching every day we go out there. So, I get out there and I'm getting prepared to work, and, and I kind of roll over and I wake up and this fucking sun's out. And I'm thinking, well, goddamn, they said we'll start working before the sun comes up and shit. What the fuck? So I roll over and I look out of the bunk. There's Captain Billy. His name's Captain Red in the book, but it's really Captain Billy's his name. So he looks down at me. He's got this big fucking grin on his face. He goes, Timmy, he says, we're not going to pull traps today, buddy. He says, we're going to hang out here all day long, fuck around, and, and
is it the book? Let me slap that up there one more.
Yeah.
I'm gonna randomly just Saltwater Cowboy. That's the book, and you wrote the book, right, Tim?
Every word of it. Yeah. The gentleman's name that appears next to mine on the bottom was kind of, he came on with me through my literary agency, which is Foundry Literary and Media, which is now Ultra Literary, as a guide through the publishing process. I could definitely write the book. That's Ralph down there. Yeah. Yeah. I gave him props and credit because he's got an awesome book out himself as well. But he'd already been through the process as a published writer and a published author. So he was there to kind of guide me through this, because when you get your work is purchased by a publishing company, this is the advance that they pay you in order for the privilege to publish your book. Well, St. Mark's.
I want to save that for after, because I want to go through the whole story and then at the end sort of talk about how you got the book, because it sounds like it's really hard to do that. And the story, I believe, that you're telling is the reason you got that, because
it's the reason I went that route, because I felt that the story was more worthy than what self-publishing could offer.
Yeah.
So I did my homework.
You looked at self-publishing options.
Well, yeah. And then when I realized that you pay what you get, you pay for what you get, I said, this is not how I intended this to happen. I want this done the proper way. And to do it properly is a very daunting task, dude. I mean, we can get to that. It's not just what you get,
or you get for what you pay for.
Well, the intention is for you to pay me for the privilege of publishing my book, not me pay you to publish my fucking book for me. And I knew that was the difference between one or the other, because you get what you pay for when you self-publish. Mm-hmm. And I went, I queried literary agencies quite literally for almost a year, but I had, we'll get to that later on, but it was very particular set of circumstances that led me to getting one of the top 10 literary. I want you
to get your story out, and then at the end, we're going to talk about how you got this book published.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, so anyways, we're back on the boat, right? And I wake up and the sun's out. Billy says, we're going to unload a pot boat later on tonight. I went, okay, cool. we're not going to work today, he said. So we fucked off all day long. My first day working on this boat, we went off that night, and just after just before sunset, we sit off from the loaded boat, the mothership as they're called, and we're at what's called the horizon. And on the water, or even driving, if you've ever driven out west or any kind of really flat terrain of any kind, and as you drive, things shrink in the distance and they get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. When they finally disappear, that's your horizon line. That's where they can't see you, you can't see them, or whatever like that. And we would always stay on what's called the horizon. And about 3 or 4 hours before sundown, my captain would there's each boat that we approach has a particular call sign. Captain would call that boat, and when we get a response from that boat, then we take off to it. So they know that the boat coming to them is the one that should be coming to them, and there's nobody's freaking out. So we pull up to this fucking boat. And my first night of hauling paw on that boat, we moved 15 tons. We put on that boat you saw. We loaded 15 tons of bales on that thing and brought it into shore. Took a couple, 3 hours or so trucking in to get into shore.
So you moved out there under the guise of maybe fishing, and then sort of it was like, hey, now we're actually going to do a little different project.
Right. Well, you know what? I obviously didn't go down there with any aspirations of potholing and shit like that. But, you hear the stories and the rumors and the talk and shit. But
before this, you never did anything like that.
Fuck no, I never got arrested for anything in my life. I've smoked weed, of course, because they that's why they knew I'd be okay with it. It was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek affair for my buddy Mark and the Captain Billy, because they waited till they got me offshore to tell me that they were going to do this shit, right? So they already knew.
Actually, can I tell you, I just want to send a quick shout out to my man, Rodney Leinhart, who did an interview with you. And I actually thought maybe you were a professional wrestler or something, because the picture, and I was like, yo, is this guy a wrestler? I would love to have him on the show. So shameless plug for Rodney. I love Rodney. He's a great man. Yeah.
No, this is just a result of having grown up the way I grew up. Like I said, the stone crabbing, dude, that, like I said, that'll make a man out of you in a fucking hurry, or it'll put you on the road and send you home. And I did it.
So that was the ruse, basically, for starting this cannabis smuggling operation, huh?
Well, yeah. Basically, that's how it would happen. But what turned the tide as far as being done in the manner in which it was done, and to the extent to which it was done, the government started making and changing the rules and trying to extend the boundaries of the Everglades National Park to include some areas of fishing that we'd always fished. Because you have to understand, the fishing industry, as far as stone crabbing, isn't just the stone crab boats and the crews and the traps. You got to have bait to go in the fucking traps.
So the Everglades, for people that aren't familiar, that's the west coast of the bottom of Florida, right?
Yes. Yep. That is it's Southwest Florida, and it is quite literally a labyrinth of, when we live in an area here in Southwest Florida that's called the 10,000 Islands. And it is literally, if you Google it and you look at it on the map, I can show you here just real quick.
I did Google it.
It's literally, this is where we grew up as kids. There's 25 miles long of shoreline and 4 miles deep of that right there.
That's your homeland.
This is where we lived, and this is where we played as kids, amongst all of that.
Nice.
That's where we brought the loads in through, and Chokoloskee Island was on the inside, on one of the islands on the back on the inside. So you had to go through these passes and make our way through the islands to get to the island, because when we bring these loads in, now we've got this 15 tons on this boat. I've never done this before in my life. This was like, boink, and all of a sudden you're loading fucking bales and throwing.
You were pretty young when you started this, right?
I was just turned 21, man. Well, yeah, I was 21 now, but there's no good.
If I believe you said the first load you did was like 15 tons, and that was maybe the smallest one you ever did.
Dude, I never saw one that small after that. That was kind of like, let's see if these guys can do this, right? Well, the next day after we had done this, and we go offshore and we clean the boat up and shit and that, whatever. And we sit next to another set of traps that we're going to pull some that next day and then come in.
So you're still fishing?
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to do that work in order to go offshore and haul pot. You just can't. The boat has to, you got to pay for fuel. You got to pay for bait. You have to do the work, because if you don't, you're just asking for trouble.
So the
how you
fishing boat
support
is like the front to cover for the
every stone crab vessel and fishing vessel that was hauling pot worked during the day. No ifs, ands, fucking buts about it. And it's not uncommon for a boat to stay out all night. Would due to weather or a breakdown or whatever, they may stay and pull some more traps the next day because the crabs stay alive.
You just like working. You like working hard,
right? So we go and we do all this work during the day, or not, depending on the circumstances. Because we could always forego the work that day, do the pot hauling at night. The next morning when we wake up, pull a half a line or so of traps, and then come in with some kind of a catch. To justify us being out there,
So when was the first load that you guys hauled? I feel like you said it was late 70s.
Yeah, it was late 19. Well, it was about, I would say, early spring of 1979-ish. 1970. Yeah, late. No, it was the fall of 78, because it was just the beginning of the season. The season is from October 15th to May 15th. And then we have all the whole summer off. So it's seasonal work.
Did you have any objections when they were like, yo, we're going to go from grabbing crabs to weed?
Not one. No. I just went with the flow, man. But the thing about it is, after we brought that 15 tons in, we got up the next morning and, pulled some traps and came in. And then we got up early that next morning, like, to go out and, to do our job that I was hired to do. I didn't pull a trap that second day either, man. We stayed out there all day long. We brought in 22 tons the very second day I worked on that boat. I never saw a trap for 2 fucking days. I just saw bales of pot coming off these boats. That was my introduction.
Right. You said 15 tons, smallest load you ever saw. And that was your first one.
First one I'd ever done.
Yeah. If I recall our conversation.
Yeah. And then the very second night, like I said, that very next night, we did 22 tons that second night. Now the captain understands. And I got rookie pay, man. I only got paid $5,000 each night, but still at that time, I'm thinking, holy fucking shit.
Was that more than you were getting paid to catch crabs?
Oh shit, man. You could live well, being a stone crabber, because it's a rather lucrative business. I was getting paid a daily wage plus a percentage of the catch, and I could make, a good, a captain that knows his shit, that can keep you on the crab. It's not uncommon to make $1,200 to $2,500 a week during season, because we could afford to live to a certain degree within our means, but. Sure. I got $5,000, and that was rookie pay for each of those 2 jobs, just, as a test run sort of a thing. Now, after those first 2 jobs, and we're working, now we could jump in and we're working 2-3 nights a week. We're unloading these fucking boats. And now my pay went from being rookie pay to the size of the load we're moving. And now I'm making a minimum of $50,000 a night. I'm making anywhere from $50,000 to $75,000 a night. Oh. Offloading these boats 2 and 3 nights a week, because
so you're still doing the fishing and you're getting the weed.
Yeah.
Yep. Where was the weed coming from, if you don't mind me asking?
No, fuck no, shit, no, dude. Primarily it was coming from Colombia, but we were unloading boats that were coming from every corner of the Caribbean. We had them coming from Jamaica. We had them coming from Central America, from Venezuela, of course. Obviously from Venezuela, Colombia, of course, Colombia, British Honduras before it became Belize in the late 70s, in Honduras and, places like that. We didn't fuck with the Mexican weed, because nobody wanted that crap, man. It was mostly leaves at that time. It was bullshit, But we went to the places where the guys really knew how to, knew what the fuck they were doing. And you could get a significant amount, because, we're talking about that 15 tons being the smallest load I've ever done. Now we're averaging the average load we go off to get. Now, it's not just our boat. A lot of times we go out to meet these freighters, and I've seen boats out here that, as a kid that had as much as 200,000 and 300,000 pounds on them at any one time. And we would take our boat and 2 or 3 other boats just like ours, 2 or 3 nights or more to get, going out and approaching this boat until it's empty.
So you're taking smaller boats to offload giant loads from larger like ships.
Right. That boat I showed you with me on the back of it, that would be a boat that we'd go out to the motherships with.
That looks like a Jenny. Jenny. Yo.
Yeah.
And
but that boat had a Detroit diesel 12-cylinder twin turbo 12-cylinder diesel in it, and that thing is
how much herb could you put on that boat?
We put on, I think, the most. There is a weight limit really to a boat like that because
it'll start sinking, right?
Well, yeah, you understand how most boats work and most boats operate when they have in the back on the stern what they call scupper holes. And what that is when you're on a workboat such as this and it's raining or it's the weather and they're splashing over onto the deck, that water runs out to the stern and it runs out these holes in the back of the boat to keep the water off the deck. Those are called scupper holes. And they're typically about 1.5 feet or 2 feet above the water line, typically. But when you start loading that fucking boat with a fucking pop, those scupper holes start getting closer and closer to the water line. And it'll get to a point where if you don't stop loading that fucking thing, those scuppers are going to water. You take on water, and now you've sunk your boat.
Right.
It's just like that. So we could
got your weed all wet.
Well, fuck yeah. I mean, you're floating in the water next to it.
Yeah. You can grab a barrel. Fine, you could float along.
And the boat's sinking a mile to the bottom, or whatever the fuck. But yeah, so I mean, on the average, a boat like ours, and there's no hiding that shit. You're not putting it under the deck and below and out of sight. Every inch of that boat that you saw on the bow and around the sides by the windows, on the top where the radar is, like this, there's weed stacked up there. There's weed stacked on the bow. We could put.
So you're driving this boat with weed just piled everywhere.
Dude, if you went over this fucking boat in an airplane during the day, as it loaded like we would load this fucking thing, it would look like a huge mountain of pot floating through the water with a radar on top of it because you couldn't see the boat. Sickening. I mean, it was just fucking unreal. But you could only work 2 or 3 nights in a row a week because we're talking about at any one time, we're moving 800 to 1,000 of these fucking things once, maybe twice a night. And, that's 80,000.
A lot of physical labor.
Oh, dude. Yeah. Fuck yeah. I mean, it wasn't always, if you're doing 40 tons of shit, 20 tons we'll put on our boat, 20 tons we'll put on another boat that went with us, going to help share the load, because I think the most we could put on our boat would be somewhere around 27 tons, something like that, before you started getting to the point where you couldn't, risk, but we wouldn't get close to that because we could count the number of bales and get an idea about how heavy we were by the number of bales we're being counted on the boat. Typically about 450 of them if they're 70 to 80 pounds, and we could judge those just by looking at them typically. In the later days. In the earlier days, it wasn't easy to do that, and I can tell you why.
You're judging books by their cover.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're looking at the bales. Plus, we're handling the fuckers. And it wasn't always just pull out to these boats, whether it's a shrimp boat or it's a freighter or whatever the fuck it is, because I've seen it come on so many different types of vessels, and I've seen it packed, and I've seen it come into this United States in so many different ways. I mean, just some of it's rather complex. It isn't just always a matter of driving out there with your boats and pulling up alongside of these big fuckers and the bales start raining down on your boat. It doesn't work that way. If we can get off our boat and get onto that mothership and help that crew go down below and put up on deck what we think is going to be enough for what we need to take that night, get it up on deck, and then we go down to our boat, and then they start dropping them overboard down to us, and we would start stacking and putting like that. So once you began this effort, we usually, like I said, start about 2 or 3 hours before the sun goes down, because we've got to have this has to happen between the time the sun goes down to the time the sun comes up. This shit has to be in and on the island before the sun comes up. So you're down there.
Everything is done under cover of darkness.
Absolutely. And you're down there and you're in the hull of this freighter and the engines are running 24/7. They never shut these fuckers off, these diesel engines in these freighters. And it's hot. Plus, you're down there with 100,000, 200,000 pounds of fucking shit and it's already starting to heat up like a pile of mulch wood, and it's hot down there. And you start throwing. And a lot of times, depending on the size of the vessel and however deep the hole is, we would stack and make a pyramid out of these bales and have a guy on each tier and bucket brigade the bales up to the guy on top where he could lift it high enough for the people on the deck to grab them and throw them over their head like that and make the pile. So you're down there working your ass off, sweating and shit and throwing bales and puke and get a drink of water and continue to work, because once you start this offload shit, dude, there ain't no stopping. You're gone. You're committed to getting it from there to your boat, to get it inshore, to get it in the, when we can't get our,
that seems like a get it done shit. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
there's no,
get out of here.
And we meet these crews coming from wherever the fuck these guys, a lot of these crews are coming from the strangest places throughout the Caribbean. And but there's no, hey, how you doing, man? I'm like, there's none of that shit. It's like, they know what you're there for.
Jamaicans, Dominicans.
You got people from all over the Caribbean, working this shit from St. Martin. You're either French or you're Dutch. You got Rastafarians. You coming from Jamaica. You might have a Jamaican and I had one crew that was a Dutch captain, a Frenchman from the northern end of St. Martin, and a Rasta from Jamaica, all in the same fucking boat, But it's not, introduction. How you doing? They know what you're there for. You're on their boat. You're down there to help them. They know the scenario. There's no talking and bullshitting and getting to know these people. So we get our boat loaded and we'll make our way into shore. Now, once we get it loaded and while we're making our way to shore, that's when the crew, myself and Mark, we can just lay back on this huge pile of fucking bales and watch the stars and shit while the captain's in the wheelhouse. He's dialed in doing his job now. He's on the radar. He's on the radios monitoring radio traffic. He's watching the radar for specific, targets that are moving about. And we have 50-mile range that can be shrunk down to 45 to 40 to 35 to 30 and down to 5 miles. So if something's tracking you, you can shrink it down and follow it and keep it in the scope. And if it looks like it's going to get on that boat, we always had, offshore what was called a chase boat. And a chase boat is a bit of a they were dubbed go fast boats back in the days. And and the idea behind that was to because these boats are only barely fucking moving. You're vulnerable. If something comes out there and decides they're going to board you, you're screwed, because you're not going to get away from these fuckers. You're barely moving 4 knots. So you have this, what's called a chase boat, riding there alongside you, whereby if it looks like this target's going to come on and it's going to come at you, get on that chase boat and haul the fuck ass and get gone, man. Now that's my personal chase boat right there.
And
Paradise.
Those fuckers cruise.
This thing had 400, had twin 200 offshore mercs that were tight tuned, really nice and tight.
So if you thought we were going to be in trouble, you have one of these boats follow you.
You just get on that fucker, get on it and go. Let them have the fucking thing, because the captain, Billy, he didn't own the boat. His dad did. So in an event that should anything like that ever take place, it was a simple matter of, getting on the radio and calling home on a specific chat, call the law. And his daddy would immediately call the sheriff's department or the Marine Patrol and say, look, I just drove out to the dock and our boat's gone. Somebody stole our boat's missing. So you report the boat stolen. That way it goes through the whole evidence process and it gets returned to the owner from which it was stolen. So we get the boat back.
Can I read you a couple comments from my friend here?
Yeah, fucking throw them out there, man.
Yeah, this is my friend Luke Williams from Omerta Genetics up in Canada. And I love Luke. He's a great guy. He says, where were the countries of origin that the bales were coming from? And does Tim remember the different strains or the years that these tons were coming in?
Absolutely. I remember like it was yesterday, brother. And how do you pronounce that? Amatura?
Omerta. It's the code of silence for the mafia, I believe, is Omerta, and it was some kind of mashup. But that's Luke Williams. He's a great guy. He's a seed breeder here.
Hey, Luke, great question, man. Yeah, no, we knew where the countries of origins, where they were coming from, and it was like I said, it's typically, a lot of stuff primarily came out of Colombia, which was the Colombian red bud, which was grown in the lower land areas where we're closer to the coast where you could buy hundreds of tons of this shit at a time. Whereby if you're doing the Punta Roja or the Colombian Gold, those are inland strains. Those are a little bit higher in elevation where they're not that close to the coast. So, you can only get limited and even smaller amounts of like the Punta Roja because that's a higher elevation strain you got to go inland for. So we're getting it from Jamaica, Colombia, from Panama, from Belize, from Honduras. And like I said, it's a lot of those Caribbean rim countries that, that had any significant amount of growing going on. And at that time, not compared to today, brother, the way you guys run your shit and grow your shit, I can't keep up with the names of the shit and the strains that they're creating and shit. Back in our day, there was only maybe 6 different strains. There was Colombian red, there was Colombian gold, there was Punta Roja, there was Panama red, there was Jamaican lion's bread, and there was Hawaiian, if you could get it, or Thai stick.
Here's this other comment that he posts up. Does Tim remember any of the actual strains they were bringing in, or was in just cargo to him?
No, we knew it was our job that, as the 2 crew bringing it in from offshore, was to, while the captain's doing his shit in the wheelhouse, like I explained, we're just back there sprawled out. We got a boat ride, man, because we just drained our asses loading this. And it was our job to go through the bales and smoke some of this shit to see if it was any of it was worth keeping hold of. Because if it, we're getting different strains, different potencies because different growers at different times of the year, it's not an exact science, in those days was, the best stuff in the world that we ever hauled came out of Jamaica. It was the lion's bread by far because they understood the virgin bud, man. They understood that. And, so we were partial to the Jamaican product and we moved millions of pounds of Jamaican, man. I mean, it was just unfucking real. But yeah, in those days, there were only maybe 7 strains and they're called landrace strains. And that's what everybody is trying to mimic are those old landrace strains that just, even in Colombia for the Colombian gold and the Colombian red bud, those strains are, you'd be lucky to find them. The original landrace strain. Everything has been hybrided to the point where those strains are gone. But the evolution of that industry, I watched it happen because I grew up in it.
I do want to give Luke a shout out because he's he watches a lot of my live streams and his genetics are really from the people that I know. WeBuildSoldiers.com or whatever is his website, and Luke has some really nice Thousand Oaks going. That Thousand Oaks look really nice, Luke.
Nice.
Yeah.
I had mad respect for guys like Luke, and everything that they do to perpetuate the industry and actually, it's all about giving people what it is they want, supplying.
He's a veteran too. He's a veteran. I want to just shout out.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Thank you, brother.
Really great.
For sure.
Really great guy. Yeah.
But as far as that goes, that's just, that was just how it was done. And we didn't always know where the loads were coming from. You have to understand the magnitude of which, of this very sophisticated organization that we created over 3 generations. I was what the United States government described as a 3rd generation pothauler. That meant that the guys and the gals that I grew up with as 20-year-olds and that our fathers and uncles and older cousins and grandpas were the 2nd generation, and the grandpas and the other people were the 1st generation. Everybody learned from generation. And this 2nd generation taught their kids, who I grew up with, taught us, because you have to understand, and what the government didn't understand, and nobody understood until this whole thing started to break open wide open, was that, and we'll get to that later on, was that the adults aren't out there humping these 1,000 fucking bales a night, Christ almighty, it's the kids doing it. Put the kids to work, And I get a lot of this bullshit about, working with cartels and it's dangerous and weren't you afraid? And well, fuck no, I wasn't afraid. And to tell you the truth, because it was done family. These were families doing this in the countries that we went to.
Did you work with some cartels, Tim?
No, never.
Okay.
No. There weren't that many cartels even in those days. I mean, there was the Cali cartel and the Medellin cartel in Colombia. There was the Sinaloa. They've been around for fucking ever. There's nothing new about these guys. But there was only really two major cartels in Colombia or Mexico at that time. And they were more concerned about moving their own shit and having their own problems in their country, But the people that we worked with, and for all these generations, like our the grandpas and older cousins and dads, and then we get to the kids, they're generational in these other countries as well. So it was more of a family type of an affair, because people are always concerned about the violence and whatever in that industry. True, and I just have to tell you that. And it's simple mathematics that decides that at the level at which we were working, there was no violence. There was not necessary. There was never. I think
cannabis is different than some of the other maybe drugs that get run. Like it's different than cocaine. There's a lot of violence in the cocaine industry.
No doubt. I mean, Miami at that time, between the late 70s and the all through the 80s, barring any other war or event like that taking place on the planet, Miami was considered the most dangerous city in the world to live in at that time because of the cocaine traffic. And it was all due because of one woman by the name of Griselda Blanco. She was the godmother of cocaine. And if you don't know this story, you should probably look it up, because she is the one that actually taught Pablo how to gather the coca paste and become the infamous killing son of a bitch that he is. She brought him and Carlos Slater out of the gangs in Medellin and taught them this trade, because to set them up as their conduit from Colombia to the United States. She wound up making Miami one of the most dangerous places on earth to be, because she was wheeling and dealing and moving so much cocaine into this country that it got to a point where she was killing people like she was ordering a fucking pizza. She was she was insane. And this is how Pablo learned to be what he wound up becoming. Shooting airplanes out of the sky because, he wants to kill a congressman who wasn't even on the fucking thing in the first place.
He did bomb an airplane or something like that, right?
Yeah, he was trying to kill a congressman. The guy never got on the plane. He just it was just like that. But so that's a whole other story in and of itself as well. But we were in the earlier days when the original pot hauler, Lauren Brown. You can look this man up. Lauren Tosh Brown is a legend. We're gonna get a signed copy of the book. I'll give you all an email address at the end of our conversation. My email address, whereby I have this happen all the time. I've got 4 books sitting out on my kitchen table right now waiting to be signed, and I'll give you my address. And all I ask is that you send a return postage sticker, or send me tucked in the book, return postage, or you won't get the fucker back.
I'll put you guys in touch. Luke, I will put you guys in touch right after this.
We'll hook you all up with that. Figure out how to. So the only way you're going to get a signed copy, that's for sure. But that was good that you brought that up, anyways.
Yeah,
but
thank you for listening, Luke.
Yes, absolutely, Luke. Appreciate you, man. So yeah, I mean, it was like, and when you think about it in real terms, and I don't know if you're a family man, a father, or anything like that, but you have to consider when you're asked about violence, in this industry and doing what we were doing as kids. And involved as we were, what parent in their right mind would send their child offshore to unload a boat from wherever it's coming from the Caribbean if they ever thought that there was any danger of them being shot or killed or whatever? Well, no parent in their right mind would do that. But us kids were out there doing it simply because we played this game, if you will, for the lack of a better way of putting it. But the smuggling industry, we were showing the world at that time, unbeknownst to any of us, how it could be done in a non-violent, family-oriented fashion. Hauling with impunity, for Christ's sake, for 3 generations. These 2 little islands in the town, collectively, just under 500 people. And half the town was involved in it for 30 fucking years in 3 generations, and nobody had a clue. That's the beautiful thing about, the story and the basis to this story.
Tim, hold up one more second. I want to just slap that up there.
Throw it
Saltwater
out there,
Cowboy,
man.
Tim McBride, dude. We're having a great interview here about the rise and fall of the marijuana empire, Tim.
Right.
And you know, I really connected with this story because of the story that my dad was involved in when I was a kid in
Right.
1991 with Billy Greer, where they got arrested for smuggling 50 tons of hash in from Canada. And
Right.
you know, when I saw Rodney interview you, and then he explained that you weren't a professional wrestler, and he asked me, I was like, "Oh, is he a wrestler? Because I'd like to interview a wrestler." He was like, "No, he's a smuggler," and I was like, "That's even better." And
Right.
so, I want to thank you, and I'd really love to get into. We've done an hour here. I want to get into the mechanics of how you guys did this, how you made your contacts, how you picked up the loads, how you got them through the islands, and how you got them to customers. Or
now you're getting into what the government describes as how sophisticated this organization ultimately was.
It did sound sophisticated, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it begins with going offshore and meeting the mothership, or it begins ultimately as I took over. I'm going to skip ahead just for 1 second to give you this bit of information, was that you would also be one of our vessels who was sent to that country to purchase for an individual. And that's a lot of the ways that, a lot of times the way it happened. You pay us we never owned the shit. We were what the United States government described as service providers.
Courier.
You got a guy in Miami or somebody, whoever wants 30, 40, 50, 60,000 pounds. I don't give a shit what it is. You bring us 175, you bring us the money, and I could go to anywhere in the Caribbean during those days and buy a pound of weed in Jamaica, South America, Central America for $10 a pound. $10 fucking dollars.
$10.
Dude, I could take three.
Can you tell us when weed cost $10 a pound in Jamaica?
In Jamaica and Colombia and Central America, weed cost $10 a pound in 1979, 1980, and 1981.
So that was the beginning of your foray here, was it not?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's when I was still on the back of that boat, hustling offshore and working and, unloading freighters and stuff. Now, once we've done our job and we bring our load in, now in the very beginning, the bales were coming in what we called pillow bales. They weren't compacted. These were the days prior to these compacted, what people understand as a bale of pot today. A large rectangular, oddly shaped, whatever.
I have a note in my phone about when they invented electric trash compactors, and you seemed very excited about that.
Yeah, you know what? That's simply because, what wound up happening was, we're moving this shit, and this is what they look like after they were compacted. Now they're all the same size. They're all basically the same weight. They've got some place to grab a hold of them, and they stack perfectly. But prior to that, we're talking about the pillow bales that were just look like somebody took a plastic bag and stuffed it with their foot and taped it shut, put it in a burlap, and then, stitched that fucker shut. And they were coming all different odd shapes. There was no rhyme or reason to this shit. And by the time we get them on our boat from the mothership or wherever the fuck they came from, how many times these things have been handled, and there's some of them got cuts and holes in them and shit. There's shit falling every fucking where's. And we were quite literally, we bring these loads in, get it off our boat onto the little boats to take it through, and that's just another part of the scenario that we began speaking of. We come in, the little boats that or T-crafts or well boats, and I've got some pictures of those boats that I could show you that can go through the shallows of the waters that have vertical and horizontal trim. So meaning they could raise that prop up. Now, as long as that prop could go under the bottom of that boat, you could go through that much water. If that prop goes through the water, the boat's going through the water. And these guys would come out like flies on a garbage can to our boat because we're heavy, man. We're 40 tons. We're not getting through the pass with this fucking boat. It's drafting too much water. So 25, 30 smaller boats were sitting in the mangroves islands waiting for us to show up. We pull up, kill our engines, and out they come. and they're all around us everywhere. Two
So
guys.
that's the outskirts of the Florida Everglades is mangroves.
This is the 10,000 islands. We're on the outside edge of the 10,000 islands, this labyrinth of islands that I showed you that Mother Nature built right in our backyard. This is where we played and fucked off as kids. We get you in there, you're lost. You're done. I had a park ranger, Everglades National Park ranger, who was on my crew, by the way, whose job was every day to go out and hunt, search, and rescue for assholes in boats and kayaks and canoes that are getting lost among these islands. That was his job, was to find these fuckers. That's what this labyrinth was all about. That made it perfect.
You had a park ranger on your crew.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And one of the guys on the crew's dad was one of the only 2 sheriff deputies in town. So, when his daddy was working night shift, it was like the back door was open.
And Tim, I did pull up the map of this. I remember the first time you told me about this, and I pulled up the map and I looked at some of it, and it looks like if you don't know your way around that type of shit, you could get lost real quick.
Dude, you have to be running those backwaters and those islands every day because there's no signs. There's nothing but visual markers, visual, signs and specific shapes of trees, or there may be a roost in this tree with bird shit all over it. You use these as markers to get you around. If you don't keep up with these cues, those islands change with any significant weather event. They change, and if you're not in tune with, even if I went down there, even today, if I went down there, I would be lost. I've been away from it. I've been away from it that long.
Even though you've run that shit,
I can get you through certain areas, but there are some areas now that I couldn't even, because of the hurricanes and the weather events. They changed the bottom shifts, the sandbars shifts, the oyster beds shifts. The bottom is always, is changing all the time. And if you're not there living amongst it as a guide, or you're down there fucking around and you head through a pass that, last year you could get through, well, the pass doesn't exist anymore. That's why you have to.
Even in your lifetime, you've seen shifts in the navigable pathways.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. It's a never ending, always constantly changing thing. And if, that's why a lot of the Marine Patrol, even, authorities that work on the water don't know these waters as well as we did. They had no fucking clue. I mean, we could lose you in an instant. So when the boats come in and these little boats come out there, 15, 20, 30 of them with 2 guys on each boat, one guy jumps up on our boat and starts throwing in their load. They're each loading their boat, and I'm throwing, and helping, throwing them on whatever boat I can throw a bale onto. They'd get 25, 30, 35 of these bales on them and then head toward the house. They're going through a pass that we've created of our own. We know the deep water to get through. Take this shit to that island that I showed you, and literally put the entire load in 1 or 2 of my buddies' houses that we've taken the furniture out of. So the boats come into the dock, the shore crews, the bale handlers grab them, round them into the house and fill them from the back to the front, bathroom, bedroom, kitchen, dining room, closets.
So you've got this whole, I'm going to stop you for a second because some people may not understand, but you've got this whole network where you've already got people bringing you weed on boats, other boats ready to unload those boats. You're now going to the shore to unload them and bringing them to safe houses that you already have set up.
Right. The safe houses, like I said, were guys that were part of the crew, obviously, who lived on the water. They had their own dock. I had their own dock like that, where all we had to do was pull up to the dock, and these boats are coming, and they're making as many trips back and forth to our loaded boat that they have to make until it's off of our boat. And the last boat, fill that house. And if that house is full, then they pull the door shut, move next door, and start filling Jimmy's house. And we start loading and filling that. But a lot of times what would happen is that the stuff is taken to Miami the next day in broad daylight is when it's shipped out of town, because we were masters in hide in plain sight.
Sorry to cut you off, but
no,
Miami,
go ahead.
For people that don't know, the Everglades is sort of on the west side of the bottom of Florida, right? And Miami is on the right side. So it's just
120 miles the other direction.
Carry on, sir.
That's as wide as the state of Florida is where we live. From Everglades to Miami is 120 miles straight across. And there's only one fucking way to get there. There's only one road to get you there, and that's US 41. And there's only one road in and out of the Everglades in Chokoloskee Island. That's Highway 29. I mean, we're literally every single day of the week, just about, there's anywhere from 20 to 30 tons of shit being run out of that island by the residents, who, by the way, it's not uncommon to go into town 2 or 3 times a day, because we're 30 miles from Naples. And if you want anything significant by the way of shopping or a mall or groceries, anything like that, you got to drive into Naples. So it's not uncommon for the, residents to be 2 or 3 times running out of town like that. So it was, 99 times out of 100, they're driving past the cops or anybody that waving at them, and their shit's loaded down in the back, vans, cars, and trucks, and, motorhomes, for Christ's sake. Anything that you could stick a bale of pot in, that's when the women, the girls got involved with. You got 20, 30 drivers that are just steady driving this shit out of town.
I do recall a story that you might have mentioned to me about ripping out all of the interior of a motorhome and
Yeah, that's a very intricate part of the story as well, because like I said, we're using all types of vehicles.
I wasn't supposed to say that.
No, that's cool, man. But as we're loading this house at night, it wouldn't be uncommon for the owner of a vehicle that we'll be using the next day to drive out and get his vehicle loaded that night while we're loading the house, drive back into town and park it in the front yard and leave it there all night long. And then the next day, we had probably 200 plus what they call 2-meter radios. And those 2-meter radios are just a handheld, like a walkie-talkie, that had a 5-digit combination on top. We'd pick a particular combination and stay on it, because in those days, that scanning ability was virtually not there at that time. They couldn't scan these 2-meter radios. So everybody that was working had a 2-meter radio. They had a way to communicate, because communication in this industry and we're doing what we're doing was key. So with the
it seems like when you have a network that with that many moving parts.
Oh yeah. I mean, you've got to, you've got to have people they're able to communicate, because while this is all taking place and the cars are being loaded and the house is being loaded, there are spotters in town. There are spotters on the roads going out of town and going to Miami. We know where every Marine Patrol officer is, where every sheriff's deputy is. There's only 2. We know where all Highway Patrol, Everglades National Park Rangers, and Marine Patrol officers are at, because we've either got somebody following them or sitting outside their home watching their house as we do this. Oh, fuck yeah. Yeah, I mean, we got bases. I mean, this wasn't just off the cuff shit going on here, man. We had our asses covered.
Well, like I said, it seems fairly sophisticated. Whoop, let me slap that up one more time.
There we go. The rise and fall of a marijuana empire, literally an empire.
Oh, yeah.
And so the next day, when it's we're sending these cars on intervals and trucks and vans in intervals out to Miami, they're instructed now. They don't know where their vehicle got loaded, because it was loaded by the owner. And they've got a driver that's paid $15,000 a trip to drive whatever's in this car, van, truck, or whatever to Miami. And they're given specific directions as far as where to go in Miami to a particular plaza, somewhere maybe in Kendall or, Homestead, which is, east of Miami, on the outskirts off of Chrome Avenue, if you're familiar with the Miami area at all, anybody out there. But they're instructed on, what particular plaza or strip mall to go to, pull in, park the fucking thing, and get out of it and go window shop. And we would have one of our guys working with a Cuban partner on the other end who actually owned the shit, pointing out that that's our car, that's our truck, that's our van. And our guys would get out, their people would go get in it, drive it off to wherever their stash house was in Miami, empty the fucking thing, and bring it back. Our guys would get back in it and drive back to Everglades and get another load if there was still time, and continue that out throughout the day. Well, we were doing what the government now calls a dead drop. Get out of it, walk away from it. Somebody else takes it, goes and does their shit with it. And the reason for that was because the guys in Miami would never know where the shit came from in Everglades. And the guys in Everglades would never knew where the shit was going to in Miami. And I think my daughter's out there dabbing. She just set off the
Is that you? Okay, I was like, God damn! Like, did the Russians set off this dead drop alarm, or
no? Put the pipe down, for Christ's sake.
as long as that's not me, Jesus, Tim.
No, they're out there dabbing, I'm sure, and they're blowing it at the fucking.
So you've been smuggling weed, and now your daughter is out there dabbing and just setting off the alarm.
He's that chip off the old block. Yeah.
So I said, thank you.
Yeah. So
I'm smoking some nice herb here from Vermont. Yo, I want to give a shout out to my man Damien at Legacy, Vermont here, and some hash rosin that I can't talk about because it's on the black market still. But
well, speaking of the devil, I've got a nice little ounce jar here of some really nice sugary sweet indica, heavy dank fucking. We don't have a name for it yet. It came from my processor in Oklahoma, where I'm building a new brand. But anyways, we're back to the.
We're gonna come back to that at the end. I love that.
Right. So these guys are taking this shit on all day and all back and forth and shit like that, and until it's, the day is done, the house is empty because chances are we're going to fill the fucker again the night before, or, that next night, so, but also built into that scenario with regards to the sophistication of what it was we were doing was these drivers, and there's, 25 or 30 of them making trips all day long to Miami and back. That's 120 miles one fucking way. And you're out there in this van or car or whatever it is, loaded with as many bales as they could fit in it. And the springs underneath the vehicle and the suspension have airbags stuck in them that they inflate. So when the car is loaded, it won't squat. Because if you put 20 bales into a car or you put 35 bales in a van, that fucking thing's going to be sparking the highway all the way to Miami.
You're installing extra cushions inside of vehicles to keep them upright?
Right. So when you load them, they sit perfect like they're supposed to. You get it to Miami and empty it out, and you get up underneath there and press the little valves and let the air out, and the car sits down like it's supposed to. It's not raised up. It's not lower like that. So you could put all this weight in these vehicles and still drive them like they were normal. But along with these drivers are hired for $10,000 a day. We would have anywhere from 8, 10, 12, depending on how many people were driving, 8, 10 to 12, what we call spotters that would simply be getting paid $10 a day just to drive to that plaza and back to Everglades and staggered. And then they were staggered all day long. They were in a different place every time. Well, keeping an eye out on the road. Plus, we already knew where everybody was. We already had a guy sitting and watching Marine Patrol, any highway patrol, anybody that mattered, wildlife officers. We already had people in position to know where these people were at any one time. But should something happen, which it never did, but should it had ever happened, what with guys and the gals were trained to do as they're driving this shit is, to allow, just stop. Because now if you're in a van, that thing weighs, almost 2,000 pounds heavier than what it normally would be. I mean, you're driving a tank. Wait for whoever it is that stopped you to get between you and your vehicle. Put that fucking thing in reverse and smack the fuck out of him.
Well, this is America. You should be allowed to drive a tank.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just waste the front end of this guy's car and he ain't going anywhere. But you're not going to outrun his fucking radio.
Right.
And there are, and even in the Everglades, in between Everglades and Miami on US 41 at that time, there aren't that many fucking highway patrol out there. I mean, it would take somebody a half hour, 45 minutes to get to you other than that one guy. So we have plenty of time. So all that vehicle had to do was smash the fuck out of whoever stopped him, drive until you're out of sight of that guy. And then one of the spotters are already sitting there waiting for you to get out of it, leave it right in the middle of the road. Get out of it, get into the spotter vehicle and drive fucking home because you've already radioed in that you're being stopped. And the owner of that truck, car, van, or whatever it is you're driving has already called the police and reported it stolen. So now it gets seized and held as evidence and then given back to the owner because it was stolen from him. That's part of the, the whole scenario. Question.
No, that's just a banner. I'm just letting.
Oh, I see.
that's for anyone, the two people that are watching, in case they want to ask you questions.
Yeah,
I got a
cool.
block. I'm still learning how to use the StreamYard here, Tim. It's
No
new to
worries,
me,
man.
but
You're
like,
doing great. I
yo,
mean,
there's
I love your. I mean, you're keeping it. Me right. Going down the track. Keep me from straying off because it's so easy to do that. There's so many. I mean, there's not one easy question to anyone. I mean, an answer to any one real question. There's always got to
it's a
be a
fascinating story, man. And like I said, when my dad got arrested back in 1991, that was the defining story of my life.
So he was indicted under federal law. Yeah,
yeah,
so he was involved with the
he did 3.5 years of federal time. Billy Greer did 20,
Yeah.
maybe.
Were they
Michael,
sentenced using the government's mandatory minimum sentencing at that time?
I don't know if that was part of it. To be quite honest with you, I've
If
tried
they
to
were,
find. I've tried to find a lot of the paperwork, and I haven't been able to find it. But
if they were busted at that time in the early 90s, the law had changed in 1987 to across the federal sentencing guidelines to mandatory minimum. So I'm sure he was caught up in a mandatory minimum scenario because that was what ultimately, shot us in the ass. But we can get to that as well.
Well, I know Billy did 20 and my dad did 3.5 maybe. And that was one of the things that really attracted me to your story was like, oh, you are Billy Greer of the Florida Everglades. And this was one of the stories that really defined my childhood. So it really, it really interested me. And I was super glad that Rodney put us in touch, man.
Yeah. And, I'm glad that my story is, able to resonate with you a little bit, and, parallel your father's experience to a degree. And when you're talking about sheer volume and amounts of stuff, I mean, I'm not out here trying to dick measure with anybody. All I'm trying to do is impart a story to you about the way I grew up in this cannabis industry and the way it was handled by the people that I learned from, the older generations that taught us kids, how to smuggle through the Caribbean and these southern waters with impunity. And and how basically how to get around it, and all the little ins and outs and ways of going about doing things. And it was just sheer I guess the best way I can describe it is a very particular set of circumstances needed to take place in order for me to be having this conversation with you right now. Because your father's 50 tons of hashish, I mean, that's a good deal. That's not I don't
know how frequently they were doing that, but that was, yeah.
I'm sure that's a collective amount all glommed together.
I bet it wasn't the first time.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, if he was moving 50 tons of hash at a time, your boy was doing some work, but and that's like I said.
Wait, that's not my boy. I'm his boy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. Figure speech. Forgive my figure speech.
No, but here's what I'd like to ask you, Tim.
Yeah,
we're about an hour and a half in. I'd like to ask you, how it went south. Because it sounds like everyone gets caught at some point, and I'd like to hear sort of how it developed into getting in trouble.
It was a bit of a kick in the ass or a kick in the head for all of us, in the way that it happened, and simply because of the longevity that we'd had experienced up and into that point. We're talking, 30 plus years and 3 generations of running these southern waters in the Caribbean with absolute impunity.
30 years.
I mean, 30 years this went on.
Is that how long you were also involved?
No, I was involved for 10 of those 30. I'm including into this story, I'm including the first and second generations and how they began. You get the whole story, of how cannabis started coming into this country by this one man. Loren Toch Brown was his name. He's a legend in the Everglades. He's one of the founding families.
Loren Toch Brown?
Loren Toch Brown is his name. You can find, if you look up my book on Amazon, if you go to Saltwater Cowboy book on Amazon and you scroll down through there, you'll see his book there along with mine, because they're all typically bought at the same time, because they,
I'm going to do it again. There it is.
That's what you'll be looking for when you go to
Saltwater
you go
Cowboy.
on Amazon. Yeah,
Yep.
and he was the one that actually blazed the trail for all of us to follow. You know, he went down to Panama. Then he went and took his crew in his boat around the corner to Colombia and up the rivers to find the lowland red bud that everybody wanted in those days. Figure out who was who's grown the shit, how they're going to process it, how they're going to cure it, how they're going to dry it, how they're going to bale it, how they're going to load it and ship it. And then it was trial and error for, quite a time before this guy figured this shit out. I mean, I'm not saying that he was the progenitor to the entire pot industry out of, the Caribbean, but he was one of the originals that blazed this trail into Southwest Florida and ultimately gave Everglades City and Chakalusky the moniker of being marijuana smuggling hub of North America, is the way it's described.
Southwest Florida, after you showed me the map, it does seem like Southwest Florida is a natural avenue for anything that's coming from that area of Jamaica or South America.
Right. And it didn't start out that way. When Todd started and began his run of figuring it out and bringing it into the United States, he was approached early on and working with the Cubans in Miami, because the Cubans and Colombians don't work well together. They wind up killing one another. So they have to put a gringo in the middle. And that was Todd. And ultimately that was me to do the deal, to make the deal, because they didn't trust one another. So you needed that gringo in there as a little bit of a separation point. Well, in the earlier days, in the early 60s, the shit was coming through the Mona and the Windward passes through the Caribbean, which was the only two passes you can take to get out of the Caribbean and into the southern waters, to get to Miami and the Bahamas and the Leeward Islands. Otherwise, the only other way to come through would be around through what we called the Gap, which was the Yucatan Peninsula and the west coast of Cuba. You come through there to get into the Gulf of Mexico. Well, when the cocaine cowboys started taking over the shit in Miami, they were dominating that Mona and Windward Pass coming from Colombia with the cocaine. So it was becoming a very hot item and very well looked after item by the United States and the Navy, for Christ's sake. So Todd says, "Look, you fuckers, bring it over here to Everglades. And once we get it into the islands, man, I mean, we own this shit." So that's how it went from Miami and started coming into Southwest Florida. That's when it started. I mean, that's when the 5 Daniels brothers, who were living on the island at that time, were kids. And the youngest of the 5 brothers became friends with Toch. Toch taught him pot hauling and got him involved in it. And he went to his brothers one day with a suitcase full of money and said, "Look what I got," and he told them how he got it. And they almost shit themselves. They threw him out of the house and wanted to, shun him from the home and the family, because they thought that at that time that if you worked with these Cubans in Miami, they just as soon kill you than pay you. That was the thought pattern, but nothing could have been further from the truth, man, because here's Craig with this sack of money, this suitcase full of money, and they wouldn't take it. And he said, "Look, just, take some money and buy your kids some bicycles or something, at least." But after they have ultimately figured out that he's got 3 suitcases now full of money, they wanted to add one right after the other, started working and started taking on work with them. And they became the second generation. When they started having kids and their kids growing up, those are the kids I grew up with. That's how we became the 3rd generation. So to give you an idea to the extent to which the second generation was working, when they got arrested in 1988 or 1984 under Operation Everglades, it was called. This was the second of 2 operations done by the United States government. They, standing in front of the magistrate.
What are you talking about, that FBI, DEA? What are you talking about?
As far as who busted them?
The U.S. government, you said?
U.S. government. This Operation Everglades was an operation that involved 250 federal agents from every branch of law enforcement from across the United States. Wow. And they came down to this little town in the Everglades and shut shit down and started arresting people. Wow. They came down first they came down in 1984. And
that's my birth year. Hey, shout out to me.
Happy birthday. Actually, I'm sorry, in 1983. But because of the the contacts that the older generations had at that time, they had congressmen and senators and judges on the payroll. They knew 2 weeks before this operation became in effect that it was coming. So when they finally got there and, they showed up to do all of this, there was nobody around. They all took off because, they knew the shit was coming. So it was pretty much a failure, to a degree. So almost a year to the day, here they fucking come again, 250 plus federal agents. And we're talking about CIA, FBI, FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, United States Customs, DEA, Secret Service was involved. ATF got involved.
All the 3-letter organizations.
Everybody who was fucking anybody, and all these agents from across the country, here they all come again in the very next year. And that's when the adults said, look, obviously they're not going to give up. So we just fucking, they sat there on the smoking cigarettes at 2 a.m. on the porch waiting for the show to start. And they showed up. Here they come. And then they started taking people and, and effecting these arrests. And there were more reporters. It was funny. There was an article written in Life magazine in 1984. Life magazine. Back it up a little.
Indiana Jones Returns.
That's the cover. That's the year Indiana Jones, that movie came out. This was a 18-page centerfold story in Life magazine where it said trouble in Everglades City, and beneath it says a small town, it's hard to hold a cell, a small town tarred with drug smuggling, and most of its 600 residents say, so what? Oh. So it went on to 18 pages talking about a small town left of mostly women and children and younger adults because the entire male population went to prison.
How is Harrison Ford involved in that? He just
that's just the picture that was on the front of that Life magazine that day that article came out.
I was just curious because I like Harrison Ford, but
that's the centerfold of the magazine right there. Okay. And then
it
goes on.
It
goes on. No, it wasn't. No, we had nothing to do with him. He was just happened to be on the cover.
I love you, Han Solo.
Yeah, right. I mean, who doesn't? My granddaughter's name is Leia, for Christ's sake.
My favorite movie is
my daughter is a huge. We're all, I'm a Star Trek. I'm a Trekkie myself,
But, I hope when he dies, they freeze him in carbonite.
Yeah, keep his head so they can someday put a monkey body on him or some fucking shit. But yeah, so what it amounted to was ultimately what wound up happening. Oh, that's a little bit better, maybe. It's like the sun's on my ass right now. But what ultimately wound up happening was, and like I said, there were 5 crews working in Southwest Florida at that time. Had a crew in Everglades City, which was the guys I grew up with. Have a crew in Marco Island, or Goodland, which is another little island just to the north. A crew on Marco Island, and a crew in Naples, and a crew in Pine Island, the entire southwest coast of Florida. 5 crews working, and on each crew, there's anywhere from 50 to 60 people working on a crew. Because I mean, we're talking about moving a lot of shit, and like you understand now, there's a lot of moving parts to this shit. I'm just putting a little bit of my goo in here.
Good. You take your time. You said you did a 6-hour podcast one time, and I was like, all right, yeah. I'll clear out the whole evening.
Dude, and I was just getting started. But, so they catch, and these guys, when I'm not working or working them or somebody's not working them or whatever, like they do whatever the fuck they want to do. I don't give a shit. Well, one of the guys that was running a chase boat, like the one I showed you, he was always a chase boat driver. He had his own go fast boat. And he was doing some shit down in Colombia on his own. And like I said, when the guys aren't working, I don't go fuck what they're doing. So he's down there doing some cocaine shit. He winds up getting fucked up and he gets busted and thrown in prison. Well, the United States government knows where he's at, knows he's down there. They know who he is. They know he's part of this crew. So they go down there and tell him, look, here's what we can do for you. We'll get you out of this shit here's what we need you to do for us, is what they wound up saying. And then ultimately, he wound up getting out of Colombian prison and come back. They put him right back to work with us. He worked on the chase boat on one of the last jobs that I had done 57,000 pounds. I brought it in. It was going to Pine Island, half to Pine Island and half to Everglades. I was splitting the load. He was working the chase boat on the Pine Island crew side of it. So they knew, the government knew right from the beginning. I was setting this job up in Miami. I mean, it took about 2 weeks or so to set a job up like this, you know.
Oh,
and then to get the boat, 3 weeks actually to get the boat down there to get it loaded and get it back. It takes about 3 weeks from start to finish to get a job done. And they knew about it right from the fucking start. The cops did.
Did he wear a wire or something?
No. All he needed to do was tell them what, when, and where, and how. And they followed me. They took pictures. Then the only thing that they had with regards to any kind of surveillance was, of course, there were no cell phones in those days, was, you know, if I'm talking to this guy and as soon as I hang up from him, I call this guy. And then this guy hangs up and he calls this guy. That's the only way that they were able to tie us all together was through phone conversations. That's the only, I mean, the arrests and the indictments that came out didn't come by way of any, you know, unique special investigative techniques of any kind. You know, it was just, you know, slap together whatever they could, you know, to get this shit stopped and have, you know, this one guy that they caught grab another one or two of the younger guys, you know, and I had 20-year-olds running boats through the islands full of pot for me like I did when we were kids. There was nothing,
Can I back you up a little bit? Because it sounded like at one point, it sounded like at one point, some of the people, some of the older guys you knew went to jail and maybe came out of jail and then hooked you up with some of their contacts. And then you started doing some of those type of things.
Right.
And then I'm just really curious, like who?
Yeah, no. That's valid. That's a valid question right there. And I can tell you exactly how that took place. You know,
I also want to ask you before I forget. I also want to ask you about weighing money because it's easier than counting.
No. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. What wound up happening as far as my being able to come in and step into the position that I stepped into was was sheer happenstance. Like I said earlier, a very particular sequence of events took place throughout this whole ordeal. Now, there was a chapter in my book I wrote where all of our crews had worked 28 nights in a row, night after night after night after night, 20 tons, 30 tons, 40 tons, 45 tons. I mean, one night after another. We even did 55 tons one night just to see if we could do it because we were just fucking around. Tired of this shit, man. But, you know, that's why half the town of 500 people were involved because you can't, like I said earlier, you can't work the same guys every night. You'll kill the fuckers. I mean, it's just, I mean, you, like I said, you work until you puke and then you work some more, but you can only do that 1, 2, 3, maybe 3 nights in a row. And then you got to take a break.
You're going to have some burnout there.
Oh, fuck yeah. And then another crew of boats takes over. That's how half the town got involved in it. You know, I mean, everybody was making money. I'm a kid. I'm just turned 21 years old. I'm averaging $150,000, $200,000 a week cash, you know, but
damn.
Yeah. You know,
yeah, that's like almost $1 million a year. $750,000 a year. Yo.
Yeah. And that's a whole other story in itself. You know, the money, the part of it, a lot of it's hilarious because we
were getting there.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. But to get back on track with your question, which I almost forgot what the fuck it was.
I was just asking.
No. I got that 28 nights in a row. And a lot of guys, when they read the story or heard about the story, they knew it was more than that. So I just left it at 28 nights. And I gave a rough calculation to the tune of about 1.6 million pounds. We moved across that little island and through Southwest Florida in 28 days. And that was just average working, you know, like that. So during that period of time, I had worked 3 nights and we did that 55,000 pounds just that night before. So now I'm taking a couple of days off. So that next day I walk around to one of the houses. We've got probably 6 houses on the island stacked full of weed. I mean, single family homes. Every fucking spot in that house has got a bale stacked to the ceiling in it. 6 different houses.
Did you buy those houses just to put weed in them?
No, these were just family-owned homes that have been there forever. You know, I mean, who would have suspected the house was full of fucking weed? You know, and who would have suspected during the broad daylight every day 40 tons of fucking shit's going out of town? Nobody, because we were hiding it in plain sight. We weren't, I mean, that's just the only way to
And
get out of town was.
and this is well before the cell phone surveillance age, where everybody had a camera in their pocket.
Exactly. Yeah. And before cell phones, before all that shit, and a lot of the counter surveillance technology that we were using and that I had at my disposal was bought by a Cuban guy who I was introduced to by my buddy who worked who was the Everglades National Park Ranger, who was on my crew. He introduced me to this Cuban counter surveillance technology expert in Miami, who was the guy that the local police departments and the federal authorities were buying their counter surveillance technology from. I was buying it from the same guy. I was buying the same, if not better, surveillance technology than the government was buying because we had more money to work with than they did. I had all kinds of cool shit, man. I want to get into that.
You had the law enforcement outgunned in terms of finances.
Yeah, in terms of those types of things, plus the fact that we knew where everybody was at any one time. There weren't that many of them. We're talking about Everglades. Fucking, there's nothing here. Why do you need 15 sheriff's officers, or why do you need 8 highway patrol officers running up and down one fucking road? You don't. So obviously there wasn't a huge force to contend with when it came to that. But during that 28 nights, we did that 55 tons. And prior to that, prior to me working that 3-day stretch, here's where the Winnebago comes in. Daryl, one of the older brothers whose job this was, whose 55 tons this was, and we were working, all 5 brothers had different guys, different places where all this shit was coming from. And he handed me and my buddy Jimmy a chainsaw and a wrecking bar, and he points over at this brand new 40-foot Winnebago. It had 125 miles on it. And he said, I want you to go in there and strip everything out of that fucking thing from the windows down. Take the counters, the taps, the floors, the seats. We even took the captain chairs out, the seats and everything pulled out of this fucking thing. So when you looked at it, you could see the cabinets and the curtains and shit. But if you got up there and looked at it like this, there was nothing. It's gutted out and stripped. So they take and put, like I said, the airbags in the springs, inflate those. So when they put this 11,500 pounds of bales in this fucking Winnebago, it didn't squat down to the road. It sat there staunch and straight, just like it was empty. Well, I walk over to the house that day after we had just brought that shit in. My mistake. At least I thought at that time. And Daryl's standing there and he goes, Timmy, come here, man. He says, I need to ask you something. So I walked over there and he says, look, I need somebody that I can trust. And I'd like to, if you would please, I need you to drive that Winnebago to Miami. It had 11,500 pounds of shit in. I just made 75 grand that night with that 55 tons. Money it wasn't about the money. Plus, besides, he said, I'll give you $35,000. It's a one-way trip, 2-hour trip to Miami. I'll make 35 grand.
2 hours. Stay over $35,000 for 2-hour drive.
2-hour drive to Miami. But the thing of it was that the Winnebago couldn't go to the spot in the plaza and, where the other, vehicles were going. Cause you got within 20, 30 feet of this fucking thing. You could smell it. Right. So it wasn't going to no fucking plaza. It had to go directly to the stash house, a place in which nobody had ever been. None of the crews on anywhere in Southwest Florida had ever been to where this stuff was going to in Miami. Only the adults, and a handful of adults who were doing the business with the Cubans, knew anything about this place or even where it was. I had to drive this shit straight to that house. And this is why he needed somebody he could trust. So I also had to stay there the whole day because as the loads began to stop coming in, they would give me a car full of money that I would drive back to the island for Daryl. So I stayed there. I brought the load, drove the load. I had to pull a fucking bale out so I could sit down there in between the fuckers and drive this thing because the seats were gone. So yeah, I drive this behemoth over to fucking Miami and I'm going down Chrome Avenue. I turn to the right and I'm off into this orange grove and I'm following instructions on the radio. And I come up to this literal medieval castle style looking fucking house that some ignorant cocaine cowboy obviously had more money than he had sense, built this god awful looking house out in the middle of an orange grove somewhere. And I pulled up there and stopped and all of a sudden they start unloading it, putting this shit down below the house. And I spent the day there and I got to know a few of these guys in the house that whole afternoon, the whole day I spent there. Well, having done that, I drive the money home. Okay, and that's all done and behind me. A month later, here comes Operation Everglades 2. That's when they took the adults and everybody that was visible and everybody who was anybody, and they put them off and they put them through the ringer as far as, the judicial process. Well, at that time, they're giving away sentences that were ridiculous because the guidelines didn't provide for the types of, shit that they were doing. Craig, Daryl, Dwayne, Randall, and Cheryl, 5 brothers standing in front of the magistrates being arraigned on their charges, and they're reading off, the magistrates leading off their list of seizures, which included a Netherlands Antilles holding company worth about $8 million in cash, untold number of properties throughout the Caribbean. Here in the United States, they owned houses, boats, cars, planes, buses, motels, hotels, timeshares, houses, you name it, they had their fucking hands into it.
Hotel, motel, holiday.
Plus, they confiscated 580,000 pounds of Colombian weed. Now, who the fuck has 500,000 pounds of weed laying around? Well, we do, right? So they're standing there, and the magistrate, he's, sentencing. This is sentencing time, and he looks them all dead in the eye, and he's shuffling papers, and he literally goes, he says, I have absolutely no idea how to sentence people like you. He says, I've never come across anybody quite like you fucking people. And the guidelines were,
what does he mean, you people?
Yeah, what the fuck, you fuck, So here they are, and Craig's the youngest of the brother. He's standing there on the end, and the judge says, Craig had been busted before. He got busted with like 20,000 pounds or some shit. And the judge reminded him, he said, Mr. Daniels, this is your second time being arrested for this very thing. I hope you don't realize, you understand that. Oh, yes, sir, I do. Well, his other 4 brothers had never been arrested before, and the judge is going through his fucking files and the papers. He's shuffling the papers around, and he finally looks at the guys, and he gives them 36 fucking months. 2.5 years, because that's all the guidelines provided for. There was no guidelines for people like this, so the magistrate had no fucking clue what to do. Then he looks over at Craig and says, okay, now remember, this is your second time. Craig's like, oh, yes, sir. And he's hanging his head like this. And the judge literally looks at him again and says, sir, once again, I have no idea how to sentence somebody like you. I've never come across in my days as a magistrate anybody quite like you people. He says, does 5 years sound like a long time? He's asking Craig. And Craig's like all humble and shit. He's like, yeah, Joe, it sounds like a hell of a long time. 5 years, and these guys are, they go off to prison and they're out within 10 months or so, but during that period, there was the work stopped. I mean, they were the guys making all this shit happen. So it didn't take maybe a couple of months, and it took this guy, George, who I had met in that house, it took them almost a whole month to find a guy that they knew whose name was Timmy, and they knew what I looked like. So they come over to Southwest Florida, over here to Naples and Everglades, looking around, and they took them a month, and they found me. So I get a knock on my door one day. I open up, and there's this Cuban I met over at that house in Miami. And, he says, Timmy! He goes, first thing he says to me, he goes, dude, he says, we got work to do, man. Can you do this shit? And I said, fuck yeah. I didn't even give it a second thought. I didn't have a fucking clue, right? Said, yeah, fuck yeah, because the infrastructure was still there. All the kids and everybody that was actually doing the fucking work, they were there, because half the town was involved, and they didn't have a clue. The government didn't have a clue to the extent to which this was taking place. So I just went back and got everybody back. I said, dude, you guys want to work? Let's work and shit. Now, what I had to do was make contact with several of the older generations who could put me in touch with their connections in the Caribbean, who were those family connections we've been using throughout our entire lives. They now became my connections. So they knew I was coming, but they didn't know we didn't know one another. So my first trip to Colombia, which is a great story, we, one day we'll get into that one. But meeting the boss man in Colombia,
why don't you do it right now?
What's that?
Tell us about your first trip to Colombia. Tim McBride, Saltwater Cowboy. Yo, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, so
I feel like I got a good other hour in me. I feel like we could probably talk for about 22 hours straight. But I'm gonna give you about 3 right now. I'm gonna do it. I got another one in me. Like, talk
No
about your
worries.
first trip to Colombia.
Yeah, so ultimately I'm working with 2 guys in Miami. I call them in my book. Their names are Carlito and Leo. The 2 Cuban buddies of mine that I met, that the only 2 guys I ever wanted to know in Miami. I said, you got people that want their shit moved. You want me to buy their shit. They give you the fucking money. You give it to me. I work with you. And I was paid 2 different ways. There's 2 different ways it can be done. I can go to whatever country it is that you want your shit, buy it, and bring it in and put it on your doorstep for $175 a pound. Or you can send your own boat to wherever the fuck it is you want your shit, buy your own shit, and bring it out here offshore. I'll bring it in and smuggle it in for you. I'll get it into the country for you, and I'll put it on your doorstep for $145 a pound. So they always usually opted for me just to do the whole fucking thing. So that's generally how it took place. Well, I meet Carlito and Leo for the first time, and they want, a little test run, 32,000 pounds, somewhere like that.
That's the test run.
Well, 30, yeah, they want, because the first time we'd ever worked together, they wanted to know, we want to start off slow. Let's get this, get the wheels turning slow.
32,000.
32,000. Yeah, 32,000. That's a little test run. Yeah. So they wanted me to go to Colombia myself, pick it out, buy it myself, weigh it myself, go get it, bring it in and give it to them and do the whole fucking shot. And I said, no problem. I got that. So my connection in Colombia, where I'm buying for $10 a pound, I buy them 32,000 pounds for $320,000. I bought them just over 15 tons for $320,000. And then because by the time that 8-day trip from Colombia to South Florida takes place, by the time I get it back into United States territorial waters, that $10 a pound shit now becomes anywhere from $500 to $750 a pound.
So I've turned $10 a pound for your wholesale price.
And they're selling it for over 500 plus in Miami a pound. So I've turned 300,000 into 15 million in 8 days, minus my fee for a job that size, which is about 5 million. They just made $10 million in 8 days off a $300,000 investment. You think them fuckers are shooting at me? They can't give me money fast enough to fucking go back. That's where the violence part of it is negated within this industry at that level. Why shoot a guy that's making you a millionaire in 8 days?
Can I ask you, Tim? Did the Colombians ever try to get you to sell cocaine?
No, but the guys in Miami tried to get me to haul it for them. And I said, you know what? No, I don't know. That's a whole different ball game, a whole different breed of people. But little did I know, Carlito and Leo wound up being 2 soldiers of that woman I mentioned earlier, Griselda Blanco, the cocaine queen of the godmother of cocaine is what she was called. Yeah. And Carlito and Leo were part of her crew. But I was doing the weed for them, and I didn't want to get involved with them because
those were your customers.
Well, yeah. These cocaine cowboys were, had so much money that they were just throwing money at me to go make them more,
Is that where the name of the book came from?
No. The name of the book came by way of one of the jobs that we had done that involved, I can get into that here in a second. Just remind me to get back to that because it's, I've got it.
Saltwater Cowboy, Tim.
I've got it on me right here, man. Saltwater Cowboy, and I got my pirate stamp right here.
Can you put it back up again? My camera was fucked up for a second. Oh, look at that, Saltwater Cowboy, Tim McBride.
Oh. And there's my Chuckalesky pirate stamp right there.
Fucking A.
But I've also got indica. And I've got
Can
sativa.
You tell us about your T-shirt real quick? I feel like your T-shirt maybe is.
Yeah, Prohibition Profits is a group that I got involved with. Just to, because they are a group of people that are interested in hearing the origins of the cannabis industry within this country, and that's what I represent. I represent the humble beginnings of cannabis coming into this country and the humble endings of how it disappeared. We were all intricately part of that whole scenario and how it took place. And the reason why there's no more Caribbean marijuana coming into this country, we were the reason for that. When they took us out of the picture, Caribbean marijuana ended coming into this country, quite literally. That's the extent to which we were working.
Can you tell us how this operation ended, Tim?
Well, yeah. Well, let me finish by telling you about what happened when I got to Colombia.
Please do. Go ahead.
So I get in this. We had ultimately purchased a jet between the three of us, Carlito, Leo, and I. We purchased a corporate Lear. It wasn't even right at close to about $1 million. And that would get me to Colombia in 5 hours, with a headwind, 5.5 hours or something like that. It wasn't that long of a trip.
From Florida.
From Florida. Yeah. I get on a plane early in the morning. I could fly 5 hours to Colombia, land in this little you're flying over a sea of entire green, and they're aiming for this little white spot, this speck in the jungle floor, which is a runway that's been carved out of the jungle. In the clay dirt that's hard compacted, very well kept, very well taken care of, that they're going to land this fucking jet on in the middle of nowhere.
You got a nice private jet, and you're going to land it on the
flying over the treetops and down onto this fucking dirt airstrip and land at this guy's mansion on the side of a mountain, right? So I fly in with took a buddy of mine, Ruben, because he was a Cuban guy and translate Spanish for me, So we get to the boss's house, and we don't meet him till the next day. We got there late. So we spent the night in an apartment.
You don't speak Spanish, Jim?
No, not a bit. Well, a little bit, enough, passing, but not enough to communicate what I needed to communicate and how I needed to communicate it. It needed to be done, a little more prolifically than I could offer up. But so we stayed that night. Long story short, we up this next morning, and here comes the boss man. I call him the boss in the book. I'll never mention the name. I'll never say a name ever. And he's just a short guy. I bet he wasn't 5'6", maybe 5'5". Jet black hair, pulled back, tight in the back. He wasn't a little bit about as big around as he was tall. He had on a pair of jungle fatigues, combat boots laced up, and he had on a belted sidearm holding his pants up, and he had on a T-shirt. When he came through the door, he's like introducing himself and shit like this, and my guy's telling me what he's saying, and on the front of his T-shirt like this is a smiley face, and underneath the smiley face it says, "Have a nice day." Well, the guy's bebops and walks past me, and I get a look at the back of his shirt. And on the back of the shirt's that same smiley face with a smoking bullet hole in its head, and it says, "Or else." So, "Have a nice day, or else," it said on the back. And right away I knew, I keyed on this guy's sense of humor. He's just a jolly fucker, So he's, right down to business. He goes, "You want to go see what you're here to see? Let's go." And he goes running out the front door, and he grabs an AK-47. My guy grabs an AK. His guy Rico grabs an AK, and I just, because everybody else grabbed one. That's the first time ever in my life I ever picked up a gun in doing this work. And I only did it because everybody else grabbed one.
And it was an AK-47, which is a good gun to grab for your first grab.
It was an AK-47. And I've gotten people saying it could have been an AK. They weren't making them in those days. Well, listen here. You any of you haters out there on this subject like this, and AK is an AK-47 model first built in 1947. That's where the 47 comes from. So don't tell me they weren't around during that time, because I'll fuck you in your ass when it comes to that.
They've got a good history of doing work.
Got absolutely do. And so does the AR-15.
Yeah, I mean,
very misunderstood. But nonetheless, we get in the Bronco and we're driving through 10 minutes. We're driving through the jungle, and as soon as his the boss is driving, and as soon as Rico, his guy, opens up the front door, man, that all too familiar smell of weed and burlap smacked me in the face so hard it almost knocked me out, dude. And if they could make a cologne like that, I'd be the biggest fucking customer on earth. But we get out.
Clone? You need a burlap sack clone?
Yeah. So I'm kid out, and I'm pushing these big old leathery leaves out of the fucking way, and all of a sudden I'm looking at this stack of shit that looks like an Incan ruin. These bales stacked maybe 12 feet high, 25 feet wide, and they go maybe 50, 60 feet down through the jungle, this whole stack. There's one here. There's one here. There's one here. There's shit stacked, all over in the jungle, and it's covered with canopy, mesh canopy. And my purpose of being there was the boss had handed me a bamboo pole about 6 feet long with a piece of metal pipe in the end of it, cut on an angle like a hypodermic, where I could reach up and stick some of the bales that were up higher, pull out a little sample and use the boss's pipe. We're smoking together. We're testing this shit. And I'm like, dude, how many of those fuckers have you got? Kick them all down here. And he'd have guys up on the stack kicking these bales off. And as they're hitting the ground, I'm spraying a particular mark on the bale. My mark. There's a reason for that too. That's part of this never-ending story. But when there's guys that grab them and they start weighing, when the weight reaches the amount that I'm there to purchase for that time, the day's done. We're over. So we go back to the house. We go back to the house. We're showering, getting ready for dinner and shit. So everybody's in the house. So we're having cocktails and stuff. And I'm sitting in this ballroom. This guy's, this is a mansion, was built by his father, who he had inherited this, and all these growers and all these plantations throughout northern Colombia. He controlled the region between Santa Marta and Cartagena. He owned a lot of those growers, in the entire northern coast of Colombia, because we were taking literally millions of pounds of shit a year from this one guy. So he had growers everywhere growing. And that's the reason why I'm sticking in trying, because different growers grow different ways. They have different styles. Some shit's more potent than others. That's just the way it is. That was our certificate of analysis in those days. That's how we were doing it. So I pick out what we need. We go home, we shower up, we clean up, and we go, and we're sitting, we're having cocktails, and I'm talking to the boss man kind of back and forth and shit through translation. And this guy comes in. There's women, whores all over the house. There's this huge party he's throwing, and a lot of the guys I saw throughout the day there, and this guy who I hadn't seen before walks into the room. He walks up to the boss and he goes into his ear. He's like this, and I'm watching this boss man's face, and it just goes ashen white. Like he had this startled look on his face, and I'm thinking, we're getting a bad vibe. He sets his cocktail down and gets up out of his chair and starts walking out of the room. And I'm watching him. And I turn and I'm watching. Now he's headed down the hallway toward the kitchen.
Tim, your video's lagging a little bit. I ain't sorry here. Oh. Keep talking. Your video just lagged. It was the first time the whole interview here. Go ahead.
No, is it okay now?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't know where it picked up at, but this guy gets up, he starts to walk out of the room, and he's headed toward the kitchen. So I put my drink down and I start following him down to the kitchen. He gets into the kitchen. Now he's fast walking. He goes through a set of French doors out onto this giant veranda, limestone veranda, down the stairs into the backyard, into this compound. And all the compound lights are facing inward toward the house from the forest, the jungle behind it. Now this fucking guy's running. And I'm running right behind his ass, right? And he gets into the jungle beyond the lights about 20, 25 feet or so. I go running past him, and I dive like a fucking swimmer off the starting blocks into the fucking bushes, and I'm laying there waiting for all hell to break loose because I don't know what the fuck's going on, right? And that must have been, it seemed like I was out there for a fucking hour, but it was only just a couple of minutes in that. And I hear this guy yelling out the back door in Spanish. Blah, 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 blah. And I can see the boss man up in front of me, and he stands up and he's laughing. Oh, and I'm thinking, now I'm getting pissed. I'm thinking, what the fuck's going on? So I see his silhouette walking back to the house, and I'm picking this shit off of me, and I start walking back, and I get back into the living room and sit down, and he's already got a fresh cocktail. He's sweating fucking bullets. I sit down, I get a fresh cocktail handed to me by Ruben, my buddy, and then one of these chicks in the room. And he looks over at me. The boss looks over at me with this big grin on his face. He goes, in Spanish, he goes, "Where in the fuck did you think you were going?" And I looked him back blank straight in the fucking eye. And I said, well, when the big dude gets up and runs out of his own fucking house, my ass is going too. So the whole room starts fucking laughing. There's some kind of joke going on.
I was going to this place called The Fuck Out of Here.
Yeah, I was getting the fuck out, which was what he was literally doing, as it turns out. Prior to mine and Rudy's arrival, he sent his wife and 3 kids off to the in-laws to stay because the family was never there when anybody was there doing business. He'd always send them somewhere else. Well, he lived on the switchback road to get up to the palace he lived in on the side of a mountain, and he had several spotters. Well, confusion came by where the guy came in and whispered in his ear, "Your wife's on her way up the mountain." And he's in this party with all these whores in the house, and he doesn't want his wife to know he had any part of that, because he's straight up family guy. So he ditches the fucking house and leaves Rico and his guys in there to take the blame for whatever party and the whores he got in the fucking house. And he wouldn't want anybody. He wasn't even around. They would have vouched for him, right? Well, the guy yelling out the back door, turns out that it wasn't even his wife. It was a car that looked like theirs. It was some other guy coming to the party. So that's what the big joke was. And he started laughing. It wasn't even his wife. And I'm thinking to myself, Jesus fucking Christ. I said, this guy's the head of his own fucking little deal here. He's a billionaire, and he turns into the biggest fucking pussy when he figures out his wife's going home. And that's the next morning we got on a jet and took off and came home. That's when I sent the boats to come and get the shit that I just bought. That was my first trip to Colombia and met the boss. And it's right here.
McBride, sorry, I'm just gonna keep splashing that up there.
Keep throwing it up there, man. I dig the shit out of it. The book is in its second printing. It's such a wild and crazy, and book on demand. That
you said
it's
also available. You said it's also available on audiobook.
Yeah, there's an audible version. There's a Kindle version. There's an MP3 disc available. There's a hardcover if you can find them. Those were first editions. Those are being sold.
Sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. The hardcovers are being sold at ridiculous amounts, are being resold over Amazon at ridiculous amounts because there aren't any more.
But you said, I want to get this out there. You said you get the most money off the Audible, right? In terms of royalties.
Yeah, off Audibles and the Kindles.
Yeah.
Because there's no logistics. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to tell people that because it sounded like you don't make as much money off the book sales as off the audibles and the audiobooks and shit like that.
Well, to put it simply, nobody ever gets rich and retires writing a book. Let's just put it that way. Unless you're a J.K. Rowling or somebody like that just, winds up tripping into a fucking pile of cash, or writes some kind of fucking shit, like that. But there's a lot of logistics involved in the publishing of a book. There's the printing, there's the shipping, there's the packaging, there's all that bullshit involved that costs money. When it comes to the downloads, like an Audible or a Kindle, it's just a push of a button. It's a fucking download. There's no logistics involved in it. So for every 5,000 units sold, my percentage of return as far as royalty increases a certain percentage. So I make almost 40% of the cost of the book or on the download. Whereby when it comes to the book itself, I make just a small piece.
I wanted to point that out so people buy the Saltwater Cowboy, buy the audiobook, and they
Well, buy the audiobook, but because I'll tell you one thing about the audiobook. I had put my hat in the ring to be the voice for my own book. But I happened too late during the contractual process because Audible and Kindle or Amazon were in that contract from my publisher. I struck them out of it.
You didn't get to voice yourself.
No, I struck them out of that. And by the time the contract changed and they took those two formats out of their contract because they would have gotten the royalty, not me. Amazon or Audible contacted me separately. Now I'm Audible and I'm royaled and royaltied and advanced separately. So I get two sets of royalties, one from the book and one from the Audible and the Kindle versions. But what's cool about the Audible version is, even though it's not my voice, I had the opportunity to meet actually and talk on the phone the person who voices me on the Audible. His name is Wes Talbot.
Who selected Wes? How did he get picked to do that job?
Audible selected him out of their stable of voices, out of their stable of readers.
So they have like some voiceover and narrative guys.
Exactly. And they've got professionals that they use, for all kinds of, voiceovers and what have you.
You got to talk to him.
Yeah. So Audible sends a message to my literary agent saying, if we're in pre-production, if you have any questions, please don't feel free to contact. So I called my agent, said, set it up. He said, just call the fucking guy. So I called the number and he answers the phone. And he goes, hello. And I said, is this Wes? And he says, yeah. And I said, is this Wes Talbot? He goes, yeah, this is Wes Talbot. And I said, Wes, this is Tim McBride, Saltwater Cowboy, your next project. He went, holy shit, man. He was freaking out. He was glad that I called him. He said, I was looking online, trying to figure out a way that I might hear your voice to hear what you sounded like. And I said, well, you know, I said, well, you know what? Interestingly enough, that's the reason for my call, Wes, because if you'd have picked the phone up and said, hello, my name's Wes Talbot, I'd hung that fucking bitch right up, called my agent and said, this ain't the guy, man. You know, this ain't going to work. But luckily you picked it up and you are who you are. And he said, I'm so excited to do this. This is my 32nd book for Audible. Everything that I have done prior to this was Stephen King's work.
And you've listened to it.
Oh yeah.
How did he do?
He did.
How did you do?
He did rather well. He did really good. And the way he works is simply that every time I had talked to him on the phone, he wouldn't allow me to give him any information about the book. Right. He isn't pre-reading the book while
he just wanted to hear the sound of your voice.
He's reading it for the first time. When you hear that Audible, he's reading it for the first time. Wow. He didn't want any other thing on it. The only problem I had with it is that obviously it's my baby. It's my story. It was written by my hand. It came from here.
You wrote the whole book yourself,
the entire everything. Ralph's name is on there, right down there. Ralph's name is on there because he was assigned to me through my literary agency, which was fine, to help guide me through the publishing process. Because when you publish a book through somebody like St. Martin's Press, who's one of the world's largest publishers of the English language, according to Wikipedia, they also publish under 6 other imprints around the world. And you give them a completed work, paragraphed, page numbered, the whole 9 yards, ready to go into copy edit, and then go to print to typeset. That's just what you give them. I could write the book. I could, I had the experience, and the knowledge and the wherewithal to write the book, obviously, because it only took 3 edits. The entire book only took 3 edits, which is.
Who did the edits? Did you do your own edits?
No, I was assigned an editor, a professional editor from St. Martin's Press to work with me in the writing of the book. But the book was written in such a way, and it was written so well in my voice that there really wasn't anything they could do to it, Plus, it's a historical accounting, so you're not going to add any bullshit in there that doesn't belong in there, for one thing. Well, Yanev Poha, who was assigned to me as my original editor for St. Martin's Press, a guy by the name of Mark Resnick, championed my story in the beginning to all the executives because he got word of the book, through my agency. And he was freaking out. He said, this is a book we got to have, blah, 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 blah. And they already had familiarity with this genre because they published Bruce Porter's book, Blow, which is the story of George Young. And he actually read an early release of my book before it was even in print. And said it blew his mind. He says, I got to give this guy a review. And that review appears on the back of my book. Very, very cool what he wrote, I got a copy of it here somewhere. I'm going to grab it and show it to you real quick. Unless you have the back. You guys have the back of the book by chance?
I don't. I only have the front.
Okay, well, I'll show you
I'd really love to know the finishing story of how you got in trouble. And you actually told me on the phone, I believe, that one of the people that arrested you, maybe you made friends with after this. And
yeah.
Super awesome to me.
This is a picture of the front page of the Naples Daily News the day I was arrested.
Area part of U.S. pot dragnet.
And then down there in the middle, it says
that's Naples.
That's the Naples Daily News.
And that's where you. Okay, cool.
And what else we've got here is the center article. The sub article says agents say 38 helped import over 150 tons. And
it sounds like it was more than that.
Well, I'm trying to find the best way to do this.
Is that what you got caught with? No, yeah,
that's what I got originally indicted for. Was 150 tons, but what they didn't realize until after they
put it up. Yeah.
Well, after they started effecting these arrests, that nearly 400,000 pounds was only a week's work. This is what they discovered after they finally, started popping into this thing. But if you look on this front page, you'll see this gentleman escorting that. It's Mikey Patent. That officer right there is John Deasy. He's the supervisor for United States Customs. He's the one that shared this front page with me on the Naples Daily News. And then
DC, you said?
John Deasy, yeah. And if I can get this to come up, this print. There's me.
Oh, Carlos Botana, Timothy McBride.
Yeah, and they estimated it was worth
Larry
some
Gelati.
$145 million street value for that. What that little bit was right there. But that gentleman I showed you on that in that picture, John Deasy, 30 something odd years later, I'm in LA Fitness getting done working out. I'm cooling down at the bicycle upstairs, and I hear this guy talking to my buddy next to me, and I'm trying not to pay any attention. Eavesdropping. I hear him talking about, U.S. Customs, Marco Island, Naples, and then he says in 1980s, and I went, ooh. And I said, I don't mean to butt in, but I have a bit of history with United States Customs, in the 80s. And he says, yeah, he says, I was on the front of one of those newspapers back in that day. I said, I don't remember which one it was. And I said, come to think of it, I've kept one all these years. And the one I just showed you just now was part of that newspaper that I kept, all the yellowing. So, I don't give it any thought till I'm driving home. And I'm thinking to myself, no fucking way, man. I get home and I open up the newspaper and there's my buddy right there. 33 years later, he and I are working out together and became the dearest friends in LA Fitness. He wound up being such a dear friend that he agreed to do. I did a documentary that you can find it on YouTube for Viceland. It's smuggling weed in the Florida Everglades. A man smuggles millions of pounds of weed into the United States, and that was at that time it had, look how many views,
12 million. Yo,
12
can you
million.
send me that immediately? By the way, you didn't fucking tell me about that shit.
Yeah.
Or maybe I forgot if you did.
They filmed for 3 days with me and John here in the Everglades. And they wound up doing an hour segment on Vice on television. They put 9 minutes and 38 seconds of it online, and within the first 24 hours.
Is this after you've been arrested?
Oh yeah, this is 30 fucking years later that I'm doing this.
Okay. So when were you arrested, Tim?
I was arrested.
'88.
October 19th, 1988. That's the day I was popped.
30 years later, Vice comes around, 2018 or something.
They hear about me. They want to know the story. So they do this video. They do this documentary. They put 9 minutes and 38 seconds of it online. And within the first 24 hours, it had 1.1 million views. Then they put it on Viceland Netherlands, Viceland Europe, Viceland South America, New Zealand, and Australia. I've got 12 million followers in Australia. I've got 4 million in New Zealand, 3 million in Philippines. I'm just now getting a gathering in Indonesia, and I'm getting DM'd from Bali, Indonesia, from Finland, from Denmark, from Norway, from Sweden, from France. I mean, in the UK, I got people sending me pictures of their book, holding my book at Stonehenge. And at the, Big Ben, and just coolest fucking shit, man. I got people all over the world and that was the reason for the popularity of the story. So when the first editions ran out in the hardcovers, they're starting to resell these books on Amazon for over $250. Well, because they're just.
And I had my dude from Canada that already asked, "Hey, where can I get a signed copy of Tim's book?"
Yeah. Well, you purchase the book and send it to me, and then I'll sign it and make sure that it gets back to you safely. That's the only way you're going to get a signed copy, unless you happen to run into me in the street or some shit like that. But there's just so much to this story. Like I said, there's 30 years of storytelling.
Tell us about how much money you were handling, Tim.
Okay. Well, in the beginning, now let me explain to you how it works first, real quickly. If I bring a load of, say, 40 tons, and I'm just throwing out numbers because I'm not wanting to do the fucking math in my head, because I've been dabbing in my cool little dab rig here. Say you owe me $20 million. I bring your 40 tons of shit in or whatever. I'll send all of it to you. And if you owe me $20 million, I'll send it all to Miami to you. I'll keep $20 million worth of it here in Naples somewhere or in Everglades. And between me and you and the bush and everybody else listening, I would typically keep it at the mayor's house. Just to let you know how cool everything was in those days. Hey. He was one of my dearest friends, the mayor of Everglades, you know, just the coolest fucking guy. Everybody called him the old man, but he was one of the original founding families, and he was mayor for decades of Everglades City. But that's how it worked. You get your shit. I keep $20 million that you owe me because I have to get paid out of that load once it begins to sell in Miami. It's not I bring you your shit and I get paid. It doesn't work that way. That's a myth. You got your shit. You start selling it. When you got $10 million, I give you $10 million of your shit back. You give me the whole $20 million, I'll give you all $20 million of your shit that I kept. Because if you lose there's a shit on your end, I can make one phone call and sell this shit and my crew gets paid. Because we didn't run the Caribbean and risk our fucking asses to not get fucking paid. So when you talk about cocaine, did you ever want to do cocaine with these fucking people? No. Fuck no, because I don't want to keep your pay in cocaine. You know, hello, I'll do it in a weed because you know what the fuck. But,
yeah, like
that it always takes a week or two. Yeah, and it always takes at least a week or two before you begin to see any kind of money. So, like when I was a kid, you know, prior to my taking over and doing, you know, the work that I was doing and working all these crews and flying all over the Caribbean and Jamaica and Central America. And I even worked with the president of Panama three different times, Noriega. There's a story there I'll tell you at some point or another, but
that'll be part 2.
Yeah, if we could stick that and a bunch of other shit into part 2, but you know, primarily, you know, it was just a free for all, man. It was insane, out of sight. You know, I mean, and the first time I say 20 tons to the majority of people, and a lot of people are going to hear this and they're going to go, fuck yeah, right. You know, I mean, it's hard to wrap your mind around that. So what happens is, you know, as a kid, I'm getting paid, paper bags getting shoved at me. Sometimes the money's coming in from 2 or 3 different jobs at the same time. And I'm getting paid for shit I don't remember having done. But when it came time for me to be doing the pay, and I'm going over to Miami to collect the 20 million or 30 million or whatever is owed to me, because now we've got 2 jobs that I'm getting paid for, or 3 of that I'm going to get paid for. We're talking about 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, $40 million at a time that I'm having to count.
And you said this was going on for like a decade?
Man. Fuck yeah. You know, they'd call me, Clayton and Lee would call me. It's time to get paid to me. And I'd drive over to a place in Coral Gable, a money house that at any one time had as much as $200, $300 million in it. Literally.
I believe you said on the phone you had different rooms for different denominations of bills.
Yes, hundreds in this one, 50s in this one, 20s in this one, you know, 10s. 5s are in an 8-car garage out back. Because, I mean, if you ever seen $1 million in 5s, would fill this fucking room behind me. You know, I mean, but when I get paid, I couldn't just take hundreds or 50s, or I had to take some of each denomination. I'm first money out. I'm the first one to get paid. So I'm first money out, but I have to take different denominations. Hence the time it takes. You know, I had 6 money counting machines that I got from a Bank of America down in Miami that was it was still too slow. I was there for 2 and 3 and 4 days counting money round the clock just to get paid and get the money back. And it took longer to get the money back to Everglades than it took to get their fucking weed to them. You know, because and what we discovered was later on, and a lot of the pot haulers and a lot of people dealing with a lot of cash in those days did, even George Young and Diego in the movie Below.
Oh, Boston
George Young's Boston George, his partner in the movie's name was Diego, but in reality, that was Carlos Slater. That was Escobar.
It wasn't Pee Wee Herman in real life.
No. Pee Wee Herman was their LA connection. But there's a lot of truth to that story. George and I became fast friends in the last several years of his life.
You know George.
Oh, yeah. This is an awesome dude, man. He just, had a lot of problems, a lot of shit, going on. He was 72 when he finally passed away, but he spent 27 years in fucking prison. He got out in 2014, fucked up, went back in, and then got out again in 2017. he just had a hard time, even, with alcohol and substance abuse, and they just, wind up killing him at 72. But barring that,
Damn.
we were kind of working pretty much almost at the same time. And, getting back to,
Well, that's right. Cause he started before the cocaine, he was selling weed, right?
well, yeah, he started off, in weed, and his story is one of the stories that prompted me to go ahead and write this because, I heard about, the weed hauling that he was doing in the mountains. He was flying to, into Mexico and, and doing and shit like that. There was a guy named Brian O'Day out in the Midwest who was bringing Asian weed into the Gulf of Alaska, transferring it to fish processing boats and bringing it into Seattle under the guise of frozen fish boxes and shit like that. And his claim to fame was, I think, maybe 600,000 pounds or 60,000 pounds or some stupid shit like that from the Asia. And then there was the Black Tuna Gang, they called themselves, out of Miami, who set up at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami, their headquarters, and they were trying to figure out the corridor of, pot from Colombia to Miami, because during those days under the Carter administration, he was making quasi moves toward legalization. And these guys figured, well, we're going to get a head start on the whole fucking thing and get it all figured out. Well, their claim to fame was about 1 million pounds of shit that they brought in. Then there was the crazy bastards from Jamaica, which I think were some of my dearest friends, at that time. The Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church, which at that time, during those days, during the 70s and in the early 80s, the mainstay of that country's economy was driven by ganja. That was their only export and the only supportive effort that was being made to fund the country was ganja.
I remember you mentioning that on the phone. Yeah.
Yeah. And, they bought Brother Love, one of the founders and leaders of the Ethiopian Zion Coptics, the Rastafarian. The original Rasta was, from Ethiopia. He was Haile Selassie. His name was Rastafari, and that's where that comes from. And they bought a mansion on Star Island, which is the only island out in Biscayne Bay in downtown Miami. There's only like 9 mansions on this whole fucking island. They bought one of them. And we're hauling, and their claim to fame was, 1 million pounds of ganja coming into the United States, because they opened up that mansion and they came to the United States under the guise of our Constitution being freedom of religion, ganja being part of their religion and smoked even by the young kids. I mean, the little fuckers smoking ganja, that was part of their religion. So on the United States Freedom of Religion Act, join our religion, you can smoke ganja. Well, fucking United States wasn't having any of that shit. So, they put,
isn't that the point of our whole country?
Yeah, they put the kibosh on that fucking shit. But long story, what I'm getting at is I'm taking all these amounts. That's 1 million pounds here. There's 500,000 pounds there, from the Tuna Gang and these guys and George and Brian O'Day. And I put all these guys' collective claim of fame in a pile. And I'm sitting there going, well, Jesus, fucking, that's not even a year's work for us, man. You want to hear a story, back the fuck up, here it comes, So that's what prompted me to tell this story in the first place,
That's what really caught me off guard, where you were like, yo, the first night was 15 tons, and that was the smallest low we ever did for a decade. Like, that seems...
Oh, yeah. Because, as you showed, if you noticed, I showed you those compressed, evenly sized bales of pot.
Well, that's why I asked you about the trash compactor, because you mentioned that in the phone call. You were like, the invention of the electric trash compactor was like a big fucking thing for us.
That was a game changer, man. Because like when I said, dude, in the early days, the pillow bales, the shake was everywhere. And then we would literally go offshore, and our responsibility to clean that fucking boat, of every single fucking seed that we could possibly get off of it, or that was on there, because if something became suspect in town, they would be out there looking and boarding and searching and looking at vessels regardless. And if they find one fucking seed on your boat, you're done.
Really?
So we're getting this shit, and we're literally, I'm sorry, what?
That bad? Like a couple of seeds?
Fuck yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because, we would literally take our boat, get it unloaded from the little boats. They're doing their shit, getting it into the houses, getting it on shore. We're offshore cleaning up. And I can't tell you how many times I've literally, me and my buddy Mark, sweeping the deck, sweeping the weed into piles with an ice shovel and scooping it and throwing it overboard to clean the deck off.
Damn.
I can guarantee you I've dumped more weed out of my fucking fishing boots than any 20 men can smoke in their lifetime. I'll guarantee that. And that's not exaggeration at all. This shit was nasty. It got to a point where we ultimately wound up taking what Captain Billy did was get a couple of rolls of Visqueen and duct tape. And as we're going out to get loaded, we line the deck with this Visqueen and duct tape it down over the edges, like make a bowl out of it, get the fucking load, get it on board, get it in town, get it into shore, go offshore to clean up, just take this plastic and get it all up into a bundle, tie a chain and an anchor to it and throw it overboard. Deck's clean. But we got so tired of handling their shit, and the older generations are finally, look, we are ultimately responsible for your shit once we take control of it. The way we're getting it right now, you got to do better than that. And that's when the late 70s, early 80s is when the advent of the commercial and household trash compactors started coming on scene. That's when a couple of the older generations grabbed a few of these industrial sized compactors and went down there and said, look here, here's what needs to take place. That's when the bales now started coming all the same size, the same weight, the same, easier to stack. Now the loads are getting bigger, they're getting heavier, because they're easier to move now. The cleanups are not happening like they used to happen anymore. It's more streamlined. And the more money, the more weight, the more money. And God almighty, for Christ's sake, we didn't need any more fucking money. We were taught as kids the value of what it meant to have that kind of money and how to restrain yourself from spending it so ridiculously that you stuck out like a sore fucking thumb. If you started buying Ferraris and Porsches and blinging yourself up, you just didn't work anymore. You've now become a liability, no longer an asset. So the older generations was very important for
notes,
them.
Kids. So sorry,
Yeah.
that's an important note right there, Tim.
No.
And I wish that everybody heard that.
Yeah, because it's very important, and it was important for the adults to make us kids understand how to spend money and not have anything to show for it, which in a lot of ways is easy to do. Anything spent less than or up to $10,000 doesn't require any proof. If you spend over $10,000 even today, you're required to fill out what's called a CTR, a cash transaction receipt that's submitted right to the IRS. Because
in
you've
Vermont,
now
it's called
spent
the
over
Suspicious
$10,000.
Activity Report.
Oops, there you go. It's the same thing.
Same deal.
Under a different name.
You put 9999 in there instead of 10,000.
Right. That's why if I pulled off to buy a boat, and I knew every boat dealer, every auto dealer in town and shit, I'm buying cars and trucks for my friends and everybody and shit. I'm buying cars and wrecking them for jokes and shit, just to piss away money. I bought a Corvette that was sitting at the Taylor Chevrolet one day because I went past there, saw it sitting there. Wound up being the owner's son who had it all decked out, had it low, had it mag wheels, had ground effects, had just a beautiful Corvette, an 80 vet. And I pulled in there and I bought it. And I'm calling my guys in Everglades to come and drive somebody up to take my Cobra home because I'm not getting rid of that. I still got that. And while I'm on the phone, I'm looking out into the parking lot on the dealer's lot, and I see they've got Jeeps for sale, rag top Jeeps for $87.95, brand new Jeep. So I'm thinking to myself, dude, grab Teddy, Jimmy, Willie, Freddie, Tommy, get their asses up here. Let's buy some Jeeps, man. So because they're under 10 grand, we could buy as many as we wanted. So we bought 7 of these. 7 guys showed up. We bought 7 Jeeps, left our cars in the vet that I just bought sitting there at the dealership. And we took these 7 Jeeps out to a place out here called Bad Luck Prairie. And we had one for the afternoon. It had one of the most badass demolition derby you've ever seen in your life, dude. We wrecked the piss out of these goddamn Jeeps, man. Just had a blast. And they're rag tops. They've got the roll bar inside. And my dingbat girlfriend that you'll read about in the book, she's a blonde bartender. Lori was her name. And she's in there screaming because she sees the roll bars and she's screaming. She thinks you can roll it. She's yelling, roll it, roll it. She's screaming, yelling, roll it. I'm half hour or so. I'm listening to this and I said, fuck it. I cranked the wheel like that and I rolled this fucking thing. I don't know, maybe 3 times. I don't know how many times it rolled over, but it landed on his top. and I'm spitting sand out. I got sand in my eyes, and she's over here crying, and she's screaming, "Why the hell did you do that? What the fuck were you doing?" I said, "Shut the fuck up. You told me to." So we just wrecked the fuck, continued wrecking them until we had one that was still in good enough shape to get us back into town. And we parked it at the parking dealership and got our own new shit and went home. But that's just that's negligible compared to the amount of money we were spending or we're trying to spend, or we're making. But that just gives you a bit of an idea about the fun that can be had with that kind of money. You could do literally anything you want.
I've imagined it a couple times.
I bought that chase boat I showed you for $89,000. All I had to do was I gave them $100,000 because they were friends of mine. They owned the same dealership I was buying cars from. They owned the boat works out in Fort Myers Beach. I gave them $100,000. It was only $89,000 total for the boat, tax and everything like that. And they knew to deposit less than $10,000 every day until that boat was, till we paid for. But I already paid for it in cash, so I was able to take it. But that's just a little bit about how to spend money, or take the tab on a club. Yeah. 5 of us would take a couple $100,000 each, $1 million between the 5 of us, and spend 4 days in Miami, work our way down to South Beach, hitting club after club after club, and taking over the tab on every club we went into, with the sole purpose of coming home with just enough money for gas, just to get rid of the cash.
Can I ask you, Tim? What happened? What happened when you got caught?
Well, as a result of that guy getting caught in Colombia and brought back and put back in our job, the 57,000-pound job that I was doing, that this guy became involved in after the government had got him on their side, I split the job in two, half going to Everglades City and half going to a place in north of Fort Myers called Pine Island. I didn't really know the Pine Island crew all that well, but I knew the Everglades crew because I grew up with them guys. So I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be in Pine Island. So I go up to Pine Island to kind of watch what's going on up there. And as the boats start coming in, we're loading in the backcountry somewhere off the grid, man. Only the Pine Island guys know where we're at. We're in bumfuck nowhere land. And the load starts coming in. And I've got a box truck backed in there, a rental truck that's going to take, our whole half of the load and take it all out in one truck. Well, we get about 100 or so pieces up, bales start coming in, and then the little boats stopped coming. The chatter on the radios, the 2 meters quit chattering. And the guy I had spotting out at the road next to the street out in the middle of nowhere gets on the radio and calls me and says, "Timmy, a car just pulled in here and backed out and went back down the road." And I'm thinking, what the fuck? There should be nobody out here. This is nowhere. Nobody has the right to even be out here. So that being as suspicious as it was, I start to walk out front. And as my guy's telling me again, I said, "Tell me again, what the fuck happened?" So as he's telling me, I look behind me, and everybody that was back there at the dock unloading these boats was then standing behind me because they knew something was wrong. And as he's explaining to me about what's happening, I hear the tire noise of, what sounded like 100 fucking cars coming down the road. We couldn't see them because of the trees. Everybody starts to fucking scatter, like turn the light on and the cockroaches start hitting the cabinets. Well, as soon as I see the headlights on the road coming out of the trees, if you run to this direction, there's a pine tree forest that you can run your ass off and keep running. If you run this way, there was a palmetto field. If you don't know what palmettos are, they're a small palm tree bush type that doesn't grow any higher, maybe 3.5 feet. A whole 2 or 3 acres of it, that direction. Well, when I saw the car lights, everybody run toward the trees. And what way did I go? I went toward the fucking palmettos, and I got 10 steps. Here comes this car screeching to a fucking halt, almost skidding sideways, and pulls up into this little driveway. And there I am, stuck. The guy opens up his door, and the interior light goes on, and he steps out onto the ground. And I'm so close, I can see his feet under the branches. That's how close I am to these fucking guys. And I can hear them. "They're running over there. There's some running over there." And the guys are squealing the tires. You know what I mean? It was like all hell was breaking loose, right? So the guy it was a tan Bronco. He backs out and takes off down the road. And then while he's gone, another car I hear pull up out in the road. I can't move because, if I move, I'm right there. And so I'm trying to figure out what in the fuck am I going to do? So a little while later, here comes this guy in the Bronco comes back again. And now it's, 20 minutes from now, it's going to be light out. And I'm right there. They're going to see me. I'm screwed. So the guy gets out of the Bronco, and and the guy I hear in this car out front, he says to the guy in the Bronco, "Where you going?" And he said, "I'm going to walk back in there and see what we got." And the guy I heard in the car out in the street says, "Well, hang on, I'll go back there with you." So they both go walking back in the woods, and I'm thinking, bingo, man, this is my shot. I'm out of here. But the car was still running in the street. I didn't know if that was the only guy in the car or not. And then if I look, because it's light now, if I look, the fucker's going to see me if there's somebody there, and one of two things is going to happen. He's going to stop me, run me down, shoot me, or I'm going to knock him the fuck out and run my ass off. As it turns out, I fucking looked up like that, and the car was empty. I took off like a shot, man. I ran my fucking ass off, across the road, through the ditch, and into the woods, and I ran till I couldn't fucking breathe anymore. And I dove under a pile of bushes and covered myself up with branches and leaves and shit. And I'm waiting, listening for somebody following me, because there's all these fucking guys. I'm thinking somebody had to see me running out across the road, but God luck had it. Nobody saw me. So I'm laying there, and all day long, and I'm listening to the helicopter, and I'm listening to them pull my truck out of the branches and banking off the truck and shit. All day long, this shit's going on. And later on that afternoon, I'm laying there, and I'm all covered up except for a spot on my face like this. And I'm just about to fall asleep because I've been up all night. And I hear twigs and branches snapping, like somebody's walking, creeping up on me. And I just opened my eye just like that. And there was a bobcat about an arm's length away from me, sneaking up on me, taking one little step at a time like this, because he saw my face and he saw my eyes moving. And when I opened my eyes, he stopped. And he crouched down like this. And I look, and I'm looking, I'm seeing it, and I'm thinking to myself, God damn it, man, spent the whole fucking night and day trying not to get caught by the fucking law, only to get eaten by this goddamn thing right here. And I said, ain't fucking happening, man. And I don't know what it just was an instinctual knee-jerk reaction. I went, wow, like that, threw them leaves and branches and shit in the air. And that goddamn cat, he jumped 3 feet in the air, flipped at least 3 times, and took off like he was shot out of a cannon, scared to fucking death, right? And I figured, okay, it's getting dark now. I'm going to walk my ass out of here. So I walked on the side of the road for 3 miles to a fish house down the road. 2:30 in the fucking morning, the morning after, the whole day, whole 24 hours later. And I walk up to this fish house, and I'm standing in the trees, and all the lights are on in the parking lot. The lights are on inside the fish house, and there's people there. And in the parking lot, now being the days before cell phones, there was a phone booth in the parking lot. And I'm trying to think about how the fuck am I going to get to that phone, use that phone without some motherfucker looking out there and seeing this one guy out of nowhere using the fucking telephone. How suspicious would that be? So I'm trying to figure this out now. And while I'm doing that, 2 shrimp boats pull in, offload their catch, and the crews to both boats line up at the phone booth to call for their ride home. There's my chance. I just kind of, after I picked all the shit off me, I just kind of slinked down there real gently and easy and got in line with all the rest of the crew. And when it came my turn, I went right to the T's in the phone books, taxi, TA. And the first one I saw is the first one I called. And I said, dude, I just need you to show up. I'm tired. I've been fishing for 2 weeks. I want to go home. Just get your ass here. I'll give you $600 cash to show up. Plus, I'll give you your fare. Just get me in town to a motel because I'm tired as fuck. He says, you serious about that money? I said, dude, all you got to do is show up. And while I'm talking to him, a sheriff deputy's car pulls into the parking lot, goes around us in the parking lot real slow. He's looking at everybody, and he goes around and he pulls out this entrance and goes and takes off. And I said, yeah, motherfucker, I'm serious. Now hurry up. I want to get home. 30 minutes later, the guy shows up. I threw $600 bills in his lap, got in the back seat, slumped down, and said, take me to Port Charlotte. Take me to the nearest fucking hotel. I'm tired. That's how I got out of there. And then ensuing investigation followed, and one thing led to another, and they popped me. And what we didn't know at that time was what I was asking about earlier about your father, and being busted under federal guidelines, in the 90s, because I know in 1987, 1 year prior to us getting arrested, the federal government changed their sentencing guidelines to mandatory minimums across the board. Discretionary measures were then taken out of the hands of the magistrates at that time. No more discretion was used. It was a slide rule. You got this amount of time, and there was nothing they could do about it because it was mandatory, unless you cooperated. You cooperate. Now they have the opportunity or the ability, because of your cooperation, if it's substantial enough, to now sentence you below that mandatory minimum. But without cooperation, you're not going to get that. So one indictment now, we didn't know the law changed in 87. We thought we were still dealing with the way the older generations were. You get caught on a boatload of this shit, you're going to do 12 months or whatever. And out of that 12, you're going to do 8. And, we just keep the rent paid and the family fed and lights on and everything. And you come home and you go right back to work again. That's just the way it had been for decades. Now they changed the mandatory minimums in September of 87, a year after, after my, prior to my arrest. We didn't know they had done that. So now when you get caught doing what we're doing, the one indictment is 4 counts. Each count is a mandatory 10 years to life and $1 million fine attached to each count. So one indictment means a mandatory 40 years to life and $4 million in fines. And there's no getting out of it. That's it. This is what you got, unless you cooperate, give the government the information that they're requesting from you. That's the only way you're going to get out from under these charges. But what happened was that they started dealing these sentences out to fucking everybody. Now your first 3 were the guy from Colombia. He gets a couple of the younger kids involved saying, look, they know your name. They're coming for you, motherfuckers. This is what they're at. This is what you're going to get. 40 fucking years. If you get one indictment, that's 40 to life on just one indictment. And you get a kid that's 20 years old and tell him that, what the fuck? He's going to tell his grandma and his grandpa and everybody that he can think of, because that's just the truth of it. There's no honor among thieves when it comes to, talking about your ass in life sentences, man. But when
you got your family on the line, that's like a serious, that is how they squeeze you.
Yeah, I mean, and this was their weapon, because the sentences that were being handed out obviously weren't having the desired effect, because I told you about the Daniels brothers, flooding North America with fucking weed and having all this money and land and property and toys and shit everywhere, and they only got 2.5 fucking years. What does that tell you? Well, they needed to stop this, and that wasn't happening, so they changed the guidelines, and now you're seriously fucked. But we didn't know that. But they gave us the opportunity, or gave the people as they're being arrested an opportunity to cooperate. They're saying, you cooperate with us, give us some names and tell us a little bit about this. Now we can sentence you below those mandatories. We can give you probation if we want and send you home.
Tell us your side of the story. We'll take care of you.
Yeah, it all depends on your culpability. Your position in this whole organization will determine whether or not, you get what you get. Well, what wound up happening was they were offered these guys these plea agreements to cooperate, but within the body of the agreement came the words and the language that we'll offer you immunity from prosecution from everything that you've ever done, except for one count on one indictment that we'll hold back. So we have to give you something. We can give you a slap on the wrist. We can give you 3 months. We can, all we need you to do is cooperate. Well, given that clause in there about cooperation and immunity, what wound up happening was the domino effect took place. Now that they're getting the first 38 of us that first day, they opened up a can of fucking worms with these mandatory minimums, and now they're getting dozens of people, and they wound up being young kids, 21, 25, 26 years old, 27 years old, because every other adult or generation prior to them has already done their time. This was all that was left. And when the United States government discovered after ultimately that, hey, we're down to the kids now. There's no more adults being arrested. These are all kids. They were having trouble. And this was done, this agreement was done by design rather than accident, in order to allow these kids who were getting life sentences to help themselves out of the life sentences by cooperating. But what that meant was you telling on Jimmy, Teddy, and Willie and like this, because they've already taken the deal. They've already gotten immunity from prosecution, so you can give their names. So they're out there telling us. They're coming after you, man. Give them our names and cooperate and tell them on us because you can't hurt us. We've got immunity. So the immunity was protecting everybody from telling on one another, and it didn't matter that all out of the same names were being said. All that told the United States government and these investigators what they're getting all the right people. So everybody's telling back and forth on one another, but nobody's hurting one another. And when it comes to a guy like me, they want to know who's in Miami, where am I going off to all over the Caribbean.
So everyone's spilling the beans, but they all have immunity. So there's, all right, that's fucked up. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was hearing that.
Yeah, they were given this chance to cooperate, but within the body of that cooperation came that immunity clause, which protected them from anybody ever saying their name, because they were only bound by one count on, a slap on the wrist. It was promised, so it was everybody's opening to get out from under these life sentences. And that was done by design rather than accident. Later on, found this out 30-something years later from these supervising agents who are now some of my dearest friends, like John. I showed you a picture of John. He was one of my dearest, sweetest.
Can I interview John?
Well, I don't know. He may hear, he may not.
Show. I'm looking for a DEA agent to interview, and I would love for John to be the first one. John, if you're listening, I'm glad we have you.
Yeah,
he's
he may very well, at some point in time, but
come on, John.
Right back at it. They were, they were concerned that, just 1 year prior, we're giving these kids, now that they're only getting kids now, they're not getting adults anymore, because this was all, we're coming to the end of this shit. They weren't willing to put kids away for life for the same thing that their adults were doing a year prior, that they were only getting 12 and 13 and 14 and 26 and 36 months for. It didn't seem right to them. So they had to give them a bit of an escape clause. They didn't tell them about it. We just ultimately figured it out for ourselves that, hey, this immunity thing can work for us. But it was done deliberately by the United States government, because they weren't willing to give life sentences to kids whose fathers were only getting 12, 13, 20 months prior, the year prior. So when it came to a guy like me, they want to know who's Miami and where am I flying all over the fucking Caribbean to see. Well, that wasn't happening, because even though throughout all the years and the decades that this was going on, the only time I ever picked up a fucking gun was just out of, like I told you, in Colombia, just for the fuck of it, because it was not necessary, the sheer volumes of money that was being made. And just the United States District Attorney caught me one day and says, Timmy, all we want to do is stop it. We're tired of it. They're spending literally billions upon billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars a year to stop the flow of drugs coming into this country. Well, and they weren't having
they could stop looking for weed anytime, and it would save us a lot of money.
Oh yeah. I can't tell you, every person in charge of any agency, even CIA and Secret Service agents who became drug interdiction specialists for the U.S. Customs during those days are now friends of mine. They all tell me the same thing. I wish they just, legalize this shit and we wouldn't have wasted our fucking time, because it absolutely made no difference in the world. The fact that here's the significance of what it was that we had created and done here in Southwest Florida. And I'll always say it, that, there are all other kinds of pot haulers everywhere, man. We weren't the only ones ever hauling a load of pot. God bless everybody and anybody that ever did. My story is I'm only telling a story about how a small town on southwest coast of Florida could integrate pot hauling into a way of life spanning 3 generations. This is the story that I want to tell, and how we were doing it with literal impunity and the sheer quantities and amounts that were mind-blowing, that even the United States government, when I agreed to give them the information they wanted me to cooperate. I wouldn't give them names. I said to 2 Treasury agents, I'll allow you to interview me, and they wanted to know how this was taking place, how I could do this for 10 years and they couldn't catch me. And I said, well, I can tell you how fucking stupid you are, but I won't give you any names. If you can glean from anything that I tell you, a name or somebody or anything of that sort, then more fucking power to you. but you're not going to get it and you're not going to hear it from this mouth. I'll be able to tell you, I can tell you how dumb you are. And the first two questions out of my mouth to these fucking people were what I told you earlier. How many roads in and out of there are there? There's one. Yeah, there's fucking one. How many roads directly to Miami from Everglades City to Miami are there? There's one. And I said, yes, there's one. How do you think we got all those millions of fucking pounds of weed to Miami? It didn't get over there on the backs of pelicans and fucking porpoises, I told them. It went down that one goddamn road, and we were probably waving at you every fucking time we did it, And they were like, and I was telling them about the money and this and that. And ultimately wind up having to not count it anymore. We were weighing, because $110 in 20s is $1 million. $240 in tens is $1 million. 22 pounds in hundreds is $1 million. This is what we ultimately figured out. So now it was a matter of counting. It was a matter of just putting it on the scale, waiting for the scale to get to a certain point. Boop, there's $1 million. I can count 20, 30, $40 million in an afternoon's time when it was taking me 4 or 5 days to do before. So I'm telling them about all of this. I'm telling them about the house full of money. I'm telling them about all the houses in Everglades.
Yeah, that's
money,
really
money full of house. And one day, they're taking me out, a couple times a week and, buying me a fucking sandwich, a sub and having me impart this information about how stupid they were and all this goings on and shit. And one day they take me out and they go right past the door that we usually go into and take me down the hall and put me into another room with a guy sitting in there by himself with a polygraph machine. They're going to hook me up to this thing because they don't believe a word I'm fucking telling them about, the whole, what I'm telling you. And I went out of there about 20 minutes later with a grin on my face. And I turn around, I look at the fucking guys behind me and they're all scratching their head going, man, he wasn't fucking lying. But they were surprised to find out the extent to which this was all happening as much as anybody else was. And that's why when your viewers hear this story, I mean, and I'm used to it, you're going to get the haters in there that are going to go, yeah, right, man. Yeah, right. You know what? Here's the thing about this, hate on me all you want. Have your own opinion. I'll grant you and I'll respect your opinion only if you've looked me up and you've come to understand my story. The way I'm telling it to you is the only way that it could have happened, the only way that it did happen. And my book could not have been published with all this information and the storytelling in it had it not been truthful. It had to have been truthful because this is a historical accounting.
Wait. Oh, wrong one. Oh, his book. Saltwater
Cowboy.
No, sorry, that was the wrong one from last time.
Oh, that's cool.
His book again.
Yeah, exactly. And just the sheer volumes and sheer amounts was something that was a hurdle to get over. But writing it in the book as I did, and people asked me about embellishment, and I said, well, there's no embellishment whatsoever in the story because two things would have happened had I done that. First of all, it would have put it, sounding so stupidly ridiculous that people would just laugh at you. Second of all, it would have put it beyond the realm of human possibility, which is the edge on which we were working at that time. To do any more than what we were doing would not have been humanly possible. Let's just put it that way. So when they stopped me and my 5 crews here in Southwest Florida in 1988, in October 19th, 1988, what literally wound up happening, and I was told this after having been invited to the Homeland Security's office here about 5 years ago to meet the supervisor for Homeland Security of South Florida. He wanted to meet a legend. He called me and I started laughing at him. Legend. What are you talking about? He says, dude, you need to just come in and talk to me if you would. I said, fuck yeah, I'll show up. So I pull in the parking lot and a Marine comes out with an M16 and he escorts me up to the door and escorts me into the building. They searched me twice and I go through two doorways to get inside to the building to talk to the director for Homeland Security. And we exchanged information that I didn't know, and he gave me some information that he did, and I gave him information that he didn't know. One bit of information he gave me was quite literally this. He said the significance of what it was that you guys were doing took place, and this is what happened as a result. In 1988, when you were arrested and all these crews in Southwest Florida started to get their lumps, that literally ended Caribbean marijuana from coming into the United States. It didn't happen any longer. It was over with. It was done by that point. Now, the Sinaloa were nothing new. They've been around for quite a while. They didn't want the Caribbean marijuana. They want to sell their Mexican weed. So what happened was the paradigm shifted between in the early in the 90s and on beyond, ended Caribbean marijuana, and the advent of the brick weed, the Mexican shit started coming across the border. Now Caribbean weed went into North Africa and into Europe. That's where that market went. The Sinaloa didn't want the weed. They had their own to grow and sell. They wanted the cocaine because they couldn't grow the coca plant. They could grow the opium poppy for the heroin, so they had all the bases covered except the cocaine. They had to buy the cocaine now from the Colombians. So now instead of coming through Miami, since the government ended that bullshit, Sinaloa now, and that's what happened. Now that's the cartel started becoming what they became in Mexico because of them taking it out of the hands of us. And I looked at this supervisor, Homeland Security, right dead in his fucking eye, and I said, how does it feel having taken this industry out of the hands of generations of families that never fired one fucking shot at you to what's taking place on the Mexican border right now? And he looked me dead in the eye and he said, I wish that they'd just legalize it and get it done with because we're fucking tired of it. This is the Homeland Security telling me this shit. And he was the only one, and I'll tell you what, out of all the people that I've ever asked this question in law enforcement, and I asked the guy whose opinion and whose answer really mattered was, tell me, please, if you would, in percentages, how successful you think you are. Sorry. Yeah, no, that's cool. Don't be an asshole. I said, tell me in percentages how successful you think your efforts are on the southern border, keeping weed from coming into the United States. And he didn't hesitate. He said almost immediately, maybe 1% success. And I said, thank you. I said, thank you, because, everyone else is coming up with these stupid fucking percentages like Reagan when he was president. And I can remember us kids, when we were pot hauling and doing our thing as kids, and remembering on the nightly news coming on and saying that, drug interdiction is up by this so much, or drug importation is down by this much of a percentage. And we're all looking at one another laughing, going, where in the fuck are you getting your numbers from, man? What's your baseline, for this?
Just say no.
Numbers? Because in our estimation, in those days, our estimation was that for every 1 pound that they seized, 200 got through. So you think you're making any fucking difference? Go ahead and kid yourself about it. That's why they spent hundreds of billions of dollars on the war on drugs over 20 years and got nowhere with it.
Yeah, and to be fair, weed is probably the most bulky drug to even get through at this point.
Absolutely.
All the powders and stuff are much smaller than that.
Well, that's why a lot of the guys, particularly in Miami, were more keyed on using coke, because the amount of money you make off of a 40-ton load of marijuana can be made out of a 2.5-ton load of fucking cocaine.
Wow. Damn.
I mean, you can bring that in on a tiny little teeny tiny boat or put it in an airplane. The loads that we were bringing in couldn't be done by airplane because you couldn't get them off the fucking ground. There's not enough. You couldn't get enough in them. When you're used to using, 20, 30, 40 tons at a time, you ain't getting that on a fucking airplane. There's only one story I wrote in a book having done a job with an airplane, and that stuff came out of Santa Marta, which was in the Highlands in Santa Marta, near Santa Marta, and near Venezuela border. And you can only get that by flying inland to get it. And you can only carry 6,000 pounds is what a DC-3 will hold. That's the maximum you can get, unless you're using a DC-8 or a DC-10, then you can get 12, 13,000 pounds on them. But to fly inland, it'd be more securely and more safe for getting it in, into the United States. The guy flying the plane didn't want to land it. So he came to me and said, I want to throw it out and have you guys pick it up. I said, cool. And I told him exactly how to do it. Well, here comes this DC-3 one day. We're sitting out there in Gullivan Bay out by Marco Island one morning, sun just coming up. And you couldn't tell the ocean from the sky. That was that clear and that calm. And we're laying there, and all of a sudden, one of the kids on the boat says, "I think I hear something." So we all go running out to the deck, and we're sitting there listening. And all of a sudden, we hear this fucking plane coming. I mean, it's roaring just over the treetops, because you can literally in those days fly. You've heard the saying, "Flying under the radar." you can literally fly under the radar, because where the radar is beamed from, it's beamed at an angle to catch everything in the sky. So if you flew down here, you were literally flying under the radar. So this guy's in this DC-3 with 6,000 pounds of shit in it, and him and 2 crew guys on board, flying treetop level with this thing just fucking hammered, flies over us. We're waving at him, so he knows that, yeah, this is us. He goes off and banks and turns around and comes back, and now the cargo door is open on the side of the plane. And when they flew by the first time, the cargo door was on the one side of the plane was open, and these 2 fucking clowns with these leather helmets on and goggles, you know, and their arms are their hands are up in a strap, a suicide strap, and they're hanging out the door of this thing waving. When they flew by, we could hear them. They were that close. So here they come again. They turn around and come back, and they've got them on skids. They've got like 20 of them, 20 bales at a time on skids, and they're 60 pounds a piece. They've only got 6,000 pounds. They've got 100 of these things on there, so they got 5 bales, 5 stacks to kick out of 20. They come by, and out would come a stack, and out would come another stack, and they got out 3 stacks on that first pass. That's 300 pieces.
That's a good pass.
Yeah, well, it was 20, 40, 60 pieces, let's say, that was out there. Now, what we did was they were baled and packaged to be thrown into the water, so they wouldn't get any saltwater intrusion into them. So they were intended to be thrown into the water. And on each one of them had about 6-8 feet of rope with a buoy on it that we could go by and catch them, just like a stone crab trap, and pull them right on board, one right after the other.
Circling back to your crab fishing experience from the beginning.
Yeah.
Here we go. We finally brought it full. Yeah.
So we're pulling all these things on board. He comes back and makes another pass and kicks out 20 more. There are 40 more to make the 100. We got these things picked up, and he wasn't there. By the time he made that first pass, the time he flew away with an empty plane, couldn't have been more than 4 minutes. That's all that whole scenario took. We had, by the time he was flying and out of sight, we had all those bales on board, and we had them on in the hold as best that we could, and out of sight, because we did this in broad daylight in the morning. I mean, the sun was just coming up. Goodland Island isn't 3 miles from where we were. We were just outside the pass. If a boat had come out of the pass, it would have seen us doing this shit, right? But the day before, what I had done, it was arranged to have 150 stone crab traps put just offshore out to where we were getting these, where the plane was going to throw this shit out at. So when you put this, this weight, the 6,000 pounds of bales on the boat's bow is going to sit like this in the water. So what we did was, and then this would happen at the time of the year when the fishermen are bringing their traps in from offshore. So I took and bought about 40 fish crates, fish boxes that we use. You just put them together real quick to put the bait and the crabs and stuff in them. You buy them in stacks like this. And I bought like 40 of them. We put all these boxes together and stacked them all up and made a big stack on the back of the boat from the wheelhouse out. Went offshore and pulled all those traps and just layered that whole stack of boxes with crab traps. So now the boat's like this. They think we got a load of traps on there. But there's only 100, there may be just over 100 traps on there. The rest are cardboard or balsa wood boxes. The weight is the weed in the bow of the boat that nobody knows is there. And we took it right through town, right past the fucking cheeky bar where everybody's drinking. Hey, how you doing, guys? You're bringing a load of traps in. Brought it up, boat in, right into town, parked it there at the house. And when the sun went down that night, we went on board and took all that shit off, put it in the truck, and sent it out of town. I think I made 400,000, and I made each of those 4 guys, or those 3 guys on that boat, I made them each 100,000 a piece, just for a couple hours work.
Away with this for a decade or so.
A decade, and that was just one. That was the only time I'd ever done it with a plane. 9 times out of 99.999 out of 100, it's done by vessel, because we're working with enormous amounts. Just the sheer volumes of the shit we were doing was mind-boggling. And, to tell you the truth, when I started writing this book, the older generations were concerned about me telling the story. And when I got to talking with them, and ultimately got the blessing, because they realized that, you know what, the story should be told, because we're not going to allow, none of us were willing, even the older generations were willing to wait for 30 or 40 years to go by and we're all dead. And some half-assed journalist or historian gets this story and this story and this story and this one and patch quilts together what they think took place. We weren't going to allow that to happen. So they agreed that, Timmy, somebody's going to write the story. They're going to write it truthfully. You're going to write about exactly how it happened, because you know from point A to point B, you did every aspect of it. You can tell the story truthfully and how it all took place, and do it and do it respectfully. And that was important to me. It was to respect the people that I'm talking about in my book, which I ultimately do. Because
you see that comment? You see that comment there, Tim?
The best interview yet. Thank you both. Hey, not at all, man. We're just getting started. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, we actually got to wrap this up because I got to piss wicked bad, and you weren't kidding. You said you did a podcast for 6 hours once, and I was ready. I blocked out 2 hours, and we got 3.25 out of it.
We got 3 hours, 25 minutes, and 57 seconds going on right now, man. We're just getting started, dude. You got this much of, 30 years of storytelling, some awesome, crazy.
I want to just, before we break this up, I want to just one more time, just shamelessly, wham, Saltwater Cowboy, Tim McBride, Ralph Barrier Jr.
$21.99 is the paperback copy, which is everything the hard book is, except the pictures aren't in color, but everything else is the same. It's the same story. It's the same me. And now that you've heard me speaking and talking, when you read the book, you hear my voice come through the pages, because I wrote every fucking word that you read in that book. And I'm so very proud of it. And I'm just happy that people are interested enough to want to hear my story and hear me tell it, because you're not going to hear it in anybody else. The government will never tell you this story, because
I don't want to hear it from
they're not going to allow themselves to be embarrassed by getting it put over on them by a bunch of kids, And I say kids, I say 20-year-olds. I'm 65 years old now.
Those are kids.
This year they're kids. We were kids. No shit. But let me just say, for those of you, again, before we cut out of here, that are interested in getting your book signed, make a note. My email address is pothauler, POTHAULER @gmail.com. Pothauler@gmail.com. Drop me an email. Tell me you saw me on Caleb's The Fine Print, and that you'd like to have information on how to get your book signed. I'll simply send you my address to where you send the book, and make sure, and this is important, that you send along with the book. And a lot of people do this. They'll take a 20 and stick it in the book or whatever and send it to me to pay for the return. My handling to get to the shipping post and get your book mailed back to you safely with whatever you may want to inscribe to, within the pages. I'll be happy to do that for you any time of the day or night. So that's potholler@gmail.
Potholler@gmail. Luke also has some nice genetics up there that he's working on. If I'm going to throw that out there,
plug away, man. Because
Luke's the G, dude. When I first met Luke at NECAN last year, I was like, I'm looking to interview people in Vermont for the weed industry, and he was like, I'm from Canada. You'll probably never talk to me again. And then I interviewed him. It was a great fucking interview, and he's a really good guy.
I've got a lot of friends and a lot of fans in Canada. And in 2017 to 2018, I did a show. I was guested in 2017 on a show out of Vancouver. It was Cannabis Culture and Pot TV, which was first put out by Mark Emery, who was their king of pot in Canada at that time. Very cool guy, an activist.
Some of my friends saw you on that show, by the way.
Yeah, well, yeah. Here, the thing of it is I had done my first interview with them, and it wound up being their most viewed episode ever. So they invited me back, and I wound up going into the studio 710 in Vancouver and doing it live. We were there for 4.5 hours because the chat room wouldn't let me go, and it wound up being the most viewed and the most the most time they'd ever spent on a show, any one single show. From that point on, they asked me, "Would you mind coming on maybe twice a month and at 4:20 Pacific time and we'll offer you your own segment." My segment was called Tim's Tales. And for 2 years, twice a month, I came on and told a story and never told the same story twice. So that's got to tell you something about what else you got left to come at you, brother. So
Yeah, we've got 3 hours and 20 minutes here, and
okay, man.
I actually missed about 30% of the questions on my list. I just freeballed this one mostly because I had
I'll tell you what.
I had a feeling you carried the show, Tim.
If you want to, man, and if your viewers would like, we can come on and just do a Q&A. I'd be absolutely happy to do that, and tell you a little bit more story and get into the viewers and responses, because if it wasn't for those people, you wouldn't have a show. And if it wasn't for those people, I wouldn't, what's the sense of selling a book? Not only that, the story that I told, the story that you'll read in the book is a required historical textbook for 2 South Florida universities. That's some more validation. That's some more validation for the book and the stories, and what people would call ridiculous and beyond, imagination is what a lot of this is. And look me up on Instagram at Original Saltwater Cowboy. Original Saltwater Cowboy on Instagram. Look me up. I got a lot of shit in there that I post about what's going on and what's happening. And,
I'm sorry. I should have got that tagged under your name there. I'm still working out how to use the StreamYard here.
No, that's cool, dude. You're doing a fantastic job.
Saltwater Cowboy. And for anyone that's interested in getting in touch with Tim, you could, if you can't find him that way, you can hit me up and I'll put you in touch. And I want to just say once again, thank you to Rodney Leinhart.
Yes, Rodney, what a cool dude.
Yeah, Rodney's a great guy. And, without him, we never would have met, Tim. So I'm going to get out of here. If we missed anything, or if you have any shameless plugs or shout outs that you want to throw out here, now is the time. Thank you so much for your time, Tim McBride.
Absolutely, man. My pleasure. I'd be glad to come back anytime, and let's have another blast. There's so much more to come. So much more.
All right. We're signing off.
Bye, everybody.
Remember, Tim, what's my punchline? The devil's in the details, and the details are in the fine print. There we go.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, my friend.